Good evening, members. It's 6:30, and members of the public, visiting councillors. I see a couple of new faces in here this evening. I'm going to very quickly run through the administration. Mobile phones, please, off or silent. Fire evacuation procedures. Those of you who don't know, there's two exits from this particular room, one at the back, one to my right, and down the stairs, and we meet in the Memorial Park for a head count. The meeting is being webcast and operational. Any apologies for absence? I don't see any. And resignations and replacements, I take it as per announced last night. Thank you, Councillor Baker. Declarations of conflict of interest or whipping decision. It is a continuity meeting, Councillor Harvey. Up to you, but accepted from last night. We move on. Yes, accepted. Thank you. No urgent items, no minutes. Member and public participation. The way we're going to be working through the conclusion, hopefully, of the scrutiny of this part of the local plan on site policies is that I do have some speakers tonight, and as we get to the particular policy and site, I will be calling up those of you that have notified us of a wish to speak. I have 3 for Bramley, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4 for Kennel Farms and Handsome Fields. Is there anybody? Go. And right on time, the standing invitation to the portfolio holder. Do you have anything to say at the start of this evening, Councillor? Okay, that's fine. Thank you. No referrals, no issues for cabinets. We're doing that for them. And crack into the pre-submission of the local plan. Just something I'd like to mention from the chair that came out, was mentioned last night around the table committee, and that was mentioned by Councillor Mitchell. It was about places of worship. I did a bit of homework on the MPPF today, and there are 4 instantiations of mention of places of worship in the MPPF. And 3 are to do with the local economy, rural development. There is one that is put into a general category of health and well-being of communities. So with that, we're not going to do anything special with it. We're not going to put it into any policies or anything else because it is in the MPPF. So if there's any thoughts as the processes go through on the provision of sites of worship, the MPPF can be quoted, even it's just for consideration. I just wanted to make that one clear. I mentioned this also to Mr. Hunter. Yes, Councillor Harvey.
Just quickly, Chair, interestingly enough, most developers are picking up in pre-app now. So if a community through pre-app identifies they have a need for a church or a need for whatever religious, that should be where it's picked up. But it seems to be working in that sense as a system. Whether or not we want it in policy, as you say, is a different matter.
Thank you for that. Right, we're going to start off with policy SS 2.2 on page 63 of 269. This is north of Poppy Fields, Basingstoke, and I have no speakers to this at the moment. Councillor Leake.
I did say that I had opposed it, or opposed the planning application on that site, and that remains the case. The point about this particular site is that the application, as you will know, Chairman, was refused. It has been appealed, and the decision is expected on or before September the 24th. And if it is refused, then or dismissed, then one has to ask the question about whether this site should still be within the plan. I'm not a gambler, as you know. I'm interested in horse racing, but that's not the same thing. But my bet would be that it won't be dismissed, so I think I'll let this one ride. But there were 1 or 2 minor things that I did raise previously, and I would like to raise again. And these are trivial points, I know, but there's one reference to Basing Wood and there's another to Basing Forest, and I think they're both meant to be one and the same thing. But most of us actually, and I'm looking at those who represent Popley, I think it's normally called Carpenter's Down Woods, isn't it? I mean, does anybody call it Basing Forest? I've never heard it in my time as a borough councillor, nor indeed prior to that. So could we not call it Carpenter's Down Woods? It would make it easier for the locals to understand what we were talking about. And I did make a comment which I thought had been accepted, because when we were originally asked for comments, which I did say that the provision, I've lost the place, excuse me, sorry, it's about the school, and I think it says the type of school, and I did say that, oh yes, it's in little b, the provision for a new one-form entry primary school, and I said that seemed very prescriptive. Can't we just say a new primary school? Because who knows by the time this is developed whether we'll need a one-form entry or a two-form entry. I mean, it just seems terribly prescriptive at this early stage. And I think I really rest my case. I mean, it's in the lap of the gods, so I'm not going to say any more about it. Thank you very much.
I've got a quick question from the chair to the officers. Bearing in mind this situation, as far as this committee is concerned with this particular site policies, do we not take it as if that planning application had not appeared and we still apply policies to this site, or have we been, we're in the OBE situation, overtaken by events?
If I understand the question, we have looked at the site policy in the light of what's happened through the appeal. So there may be, we may have picked up a few bits and pieces in terms of the appeal where particular issues were pulled out, but this is looking at it purely from the perspective of the site assessment and comparing it with all the other sites that were put through the SHLA, and it's included because it is one of the better performing sites within that suite of sites that we've assessed.
Anybody else? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. As ever with these things, that's a matter of opinion, and I respect the professional opinion of the officers, but tend to disagree, as others said last night to start with. I think the interesting thing about this is you can't uninvent what has happened, and the context of that, in the sense of this site being tested by the planning system, is something that we should consider, because the consequences of that and the positions taken by our planning officers have direct relevance as to whether or not this site is allocable in the first place, whether it can be allocated. If we look at the actual proposal, the policy on the pages here, picking out little c, little d, little f, little I, and little j, we go through a whole series of arguments and statements that are directly, well, they can be directly countered by our own officers' evidence presented at the appeal in the context of landscape, countryside, and the visual amenity, in the context of the wildlife aspect, and I don't think the policy picks up well enough the wildlife aspect at all in the ecology debate that took place at the appeal, and the importance of the ecology on this site in particular to the transfer of species from the east and west of Basingstoke through the north. This is such a critical location that was identified through the various studies for ecology that we would be foolish not to take it forward in a really strong way. We have to be clear, and I think in that sense, you know, moving the great crested newts as were from one to another location as has been, they've been moved once out of their original location to accommodate the North of Area Action Plan. They've been transposed to this site. The mitigation that was proposed by the particular developer and the proposer of this site is not sufficient in the planning application, and the planning policy is currently written, I don't think is sufficient to offer protection. That's just one area of importance, I think, to pick out. And I do, draw us back to some of the letters exchanged between the Hampshire Wildlife Trust and the EA on these matters, where they're very clear of the danger posed to the ecology. That's just one aspect. Move on through the areas here in terms of transport. The issues of the site and the isolation of the site from the rest of the Popley community is an issue. the actual ability of residents who would perhaps live here on this site and accessing facilities and accessing the local community area, it would be something quite amazing to see, really, because there ain't going to be any buses on this site. Because at the moment, the proposals and the way that the transport assessments have been done, the application before it didn't meet that. Does the planning policy pick up on it? I don't think it does strongly enough. So again, we're trapped between the two. Does the planning policy answer the questions that were raised during the planning application? I don't think it does. Did the developer come forward with enough to warrant public transport? Well, no, because you couldn't get a bus up what they were proposing as the roads. It just physically couldn't be done. Raises all sorts of issues there that should be seriously considered in a planning policy if we're going to be tight enough on this. The issues here include measures to secure strategic biodiversity enhancements. We're building in the countryside, you're destroying open countryside to build residential, and you're going over ecologically sensitive areas. How in the world a development could then be strategically possible to give you a biodiversity enhancement, I genuinely do not know. And neither could any of the experts that gave evidence at the appeal in that sense. In terms of the North of Basingstoke Area Action Plan, and this is, I think, perhaps a hook to hang this site on, it is the coherence of the local community. Popley has expanded so dramatically in the past 10 years. We're talking the best part of 2,000 units have been put up in Popley in 10 years, both through greenfield development on the two major county council sites and regeneration of significant parts of the existing Popley estate. If you take account of that in terms of the community moving in, the community moving within its own self, from one housing to another, as well as the existing community that has stayed, one of the issues that was drawn out at the appeal and drawn out during the planning application was the coherence of the local community and the need for it to establish what it's got, let alone put another 450 on top. None of the residents were consulted about this particular development on top of the area action plan they'd agreed. If you actually think about it, Popley had one of the very first neighbourhood plans in the country. It had the North of Area Action Plan. It had the first that involved the residents. And they signed up to what was happening over the last 10 years. That is not complete. And that was one of the major arguments at the appeal. Actually, the process of development that has been ongoing in Popley, particularly now with Merton Rise, has not been completed. So at this stage, I would argue, as all of the other sites, and we can pick out the particular points, I think this is overdevelopment of that particular community in its current frame, because we've not delivered Merton Rise yet. The coherence, wildlife, ecological and transport issues are fairly major, and I don't see how the simple policy as it is written can guarantee the security of that site set against what we've now seen come forward in a planning application. Because I thought the developer rode roughshod over a lot of the aspiration that's written into here, accepting what Andrew has said, that he's tried to rewrite the policy accordingly. So from my perspective, I don't want to see this site go forward. I genuinely don't. I think you either absorb the numbers into Manydown, you see Aldermaston Triangle coming forward, which is an important site that was part of the old area action plan, and that's for 300 odd units as well, or you look to accommodate it in a different way. But I just don't believe this site is suitable at all.
Do officers have a view on that? I'm not quite sure what comes first here, the chicken or the egg. And this is the problem. It's very, very difficult for members to ignore what has happened in the planning application and subsequent appeal. This is why I was trying to ascertain whether we look at this in total isolation and try and forget that, which is almost impossible, because a lot of the members sitting in this room at the moment were involved in some of those decisions. Some guidance would help.
Again, just simply, I mean, in terms of the sites, they've all been assessed in the same way. So we've looked at all the sites in a level playing field. Where new information's become available, either through planning application or through landowner, we've tried to pick those things up in the particular policies. I think in terms of just some of those issues, I mean, if there are particular wording changes that can be suggested, then I think we're more than happy to look at those, as we have been throughout the process. But we are looking at this at a strategic level, looking at it from an allocation point. We're not looking at it at a planning application level. And we have to deal with this as we would deal with all sites in an equal and level playing field. Taking on board, Councillor Harvey's points that some of the issues might need to be elaborated more in the policy, and again, if there's some specific words, then we can consider those.
Councillor Harvey?
Just quickly to come back, I totally understand what Andrew's saying, I appreciate it, but I also hear what our planning barrister said at the appeal when he constructed his arguments for the rejection of the site. And they weren't small things. It was a very well thought through, considered approach to this particular site in its development terms. And I think listening to a QC in that environment was something that gave me some pretty firm opinions based on the planning reasons why this site should not be allocated. And that's a planning barrister giving a view. I appreciate it was in the planning context, but nonetheless that was a planning barrister giving a view on behalf of this council. And I'm listening to that in the context of whether this site should be allocated.
As we started off this exercise of working through the sites, whatever comes out at the end of it, I think we have to look at what the officers have had here. Now, if they've already listened to what's going on in the current appeal process for this particular site, have you actually made some amendments to it? Well, what's before us? Yes, you have. Then the only way we can really progress this is if there is some other words that can be provided to reflect your feelings that would need to be agreed by the committee, because that's the basis of how we're conducting these particular meetings at the moment. I will let it rest there, unless I have some input available to the committee and that the committee agrees with. We don't have any other input. I'm going to move on to the next site. Okay. Councillor James, then Councillor Mitchell.
I would like to see this site removed from the local plan. I want to see it removed because we have, as Councillor Harvey said, we have a North of Basingstoke action plan, and this policy SS22 does make no reference to that North of Popley action plan. We have worked very hard with the community to develop that. There are outstanding sites that have got to come forward as part of that. Paul's named two of those, one of those being Merton Rise and the other one is the is Aldermaston Triangle. It makes no reference in here or in relation to the site selection that Aldermaston Triangle is now coming forward for development. If we dismiss that plan, it will send a message, I think, to the other people that throughout these communities you're asking to actually develop neighbourhood plans. We spent many years developing that neighbourhood plan with the residents of Popley and their buy-in to development, substantial development, and not all of that development has actually been developed as of yet. Therefore, I would like to see this removed in the life of this plan, whether it comes back in the next local plan, but I don't want to see it in this local plan because we have outstanding development to take place, and that it will be overdevelopment of an area, and also it will be basically sticking two fingers up to the community in Popley and saying, you may have a neighbourhood plan, but we're going to add this to it and just tack this on the end. We're going to tag on a 21 acre site on the end of your area plan. So I would like to see it removed. I also want to talk about some of the wording within this document, and I think it hasn't taken account of that appeal process, and there's lots of bits in here that it hasn't taken account of. But in relation to the mitigation, and what I quite like to do is at the end of this local plan, as a piece of scrutiny as this committee, I would like to take this policy as written here now, and I would like to scrutinise it against what we end up, or what we saw coming forward to DC, and actually think about the wording from this, and whether we could have learnt, if we can learn things from this, and what we end up in. So this is the policy that we've got. what do we actually end up having as a as a development? And I think, you know, if we actually looked at this wording here, we'd be absolutely shocked if we saw what came forward. And I think, you know, if we look at the words limit, this is D, limit the direct and indirect impact on local species and habitat. And then you look at what the developer came forward with. Then you look at some of the other areas around all of the bits around open space, I think are just incredible. So I want us to remove this site from this plan. There was unanimous support at the last P&I that we actually remove it from the plan, and also when it went to DC, there was unanimous support against this development. But the other thing that I want to talk about, and it was raised by the cabinet member at the start of this process a few weeks back, was the green corridor. And we talked about the value of a green corridor. And there's no mention within this policy of a green corridor. That site is in the centre of a green corridor, which is unique to this area. We're exceptionally lucky in Basingstoke to have such a thing, and there is a species of bat that is reliant on that green corridor and can only breed because of the amount of space it has, and therefore I think, you know, if we're going to make any reference, we need to make reference to the green corridor. I don't know where we got with the cabinet member in referring to the importance of green corridors, but that needs to be within this policy. And also, you know how I feel about John. You know how I feel about this species of the great crested newt. You know, I'm passionate about it. And if you look here at what we're doing to that species in D, I just am appalled. And I feel saddened by what we're doing to that species. We move it to one site, and we make it a little home in this site. Then when the developer thinks, oh, I'm going to develop the next site, you know, I'm going to have another go. Never told us that when it moved that species in the first place, because if it had, we would have never moved it to where we are and where we've put it. So now we've got to move it again. And my understanding from ecologists that those newts won't survive. So I'm really saddened by that. So I'd like to see this site removed, and I don't want to see it in the life of this plan.
I'll come back to your last remark when we've heard the rest of the speakers. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chairman. I initially put my hand up to speak because I was going to ask whether Councillor Harvey, when he spoke, actually was recommending some changes, because he listed a whole set of things that are wrong or inadequate or something in the policy as written. But he answered that question, or was he actually asking to be taken out? But he answered that question at the end by saying, I want it taken out. I do think we should look at those two things separately, because we either will take it out, in which case the members wanting to take it out should tell us what goes in instead of it, and explain why that site is definitely preferred to this site. And by all means, let's discuss that all over again, although the site selection process has had a huge amount of attention. On the other hand, those members who think there are serious deficiencies in the policy, which is what we're mainly here to discuss, it's all right saying there's all sorts of deficiencies, but we really need to come up with some wordings in case the site isn't taken out and goes forward as part of the allocations, that says, what are the changes I want to see in this policy, explicitly. And there's been a lot of hints and words around that, but I haven't actually heard anything said that says, here's a sentence I want put in, and here's a sentence I want put in, and here's a phrase I want taken out. And so please, Chairman, can we discuss the two matters separately? Can you agree that we will discuss those two questions separately? Because if we discuss them in the same speech, which is what we've heard so far, we've got absolutely nothing to hang our hat on at all. I mean, if somebody wants to move, we take it out. We can debate that and decide one way or the other. And then if that's lost, we can debate what wording to put in. but of course, we're only recommending here, and if we say in this meeting it should be taken out, it's up to the Cabinet whether to leave it in or take it out again, in which case we really ought to discuss what, if anything, is wrong with the policy and how can that be addressed. And I sat through the, as you well know, the DC hearing on this. It wasn't, by the way, unanimous. We should be very careful making comments about DC meetings because, generally speaking, we don't record who votes and we don't record the votes. We just say it's passed or it's refused or it's approved. This one was refused, but it wasn't unanimous.
To interrupt, but it was unanimous.
It wasn't unanimous, I didn't vote, so I abstained.
Yes, you asked me a question, Councillor Mitchell. The answer is yes, I'll take the two issues separately. Absolutely. Councillor Harvey again.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points, really. Is the site, if you talked about it completely logically, sequentially doing analysis of it, is it sustainable? And the answer to that, on the current proposal, the current examination of the site, I would argue it is not. Therefore, should it have been allocated? Should it be allocated? I agree that's the first principal point. If you get past that, and I doubt that you should, then you're into rewording it. Now, the one thing I am not is a planning barrister. I am not a planning lawyer. I am not a planning expert. But what I know is that the notice of refusal that our office has drafted contains some very good language around the key issues that were raised through that process. What I know is that the appeal contained evidence presented by our team, including our planning barrister, that contains really good wording that should be in a policy. Now, if you're going to go down that road, I'm not going to wordsmith it tonight because I haven't got the skills or the ability to sit here and give you something that I want to see. And the reason why I won't do it is because it won't be legally watertight. It won't stand up to a planning barrister's interrogation because I'm not that expert. But I want an expert to give me a planning policy on this site that gives us that security. I want that level of security in a policy, and I'm sure everybody else does on their own sites. And why wouldn't you? And really, why wouldn't you in that context? So in a sense, we have actually got quite significant professional advice, and I just really think we should follow it in the reworking of this on the wildlife, transport, and other areas. And I'm not into this game, and I don't want to get drawn into this game of, okay, so I'm going to take this out, where am I going to find somebody else to dump it on? If we have a genuine, logical, planning reason for saying no to something, then it is, in a sense, for the Cabinet and the officers to work out where the rest goes. Many down could take 450 more within the scope of where the landowner has suggested they want to actually take the site. They've said they want the site to be the best part of 4,000 plus. At the moment, we've set the allocation at 3,080 within the life of this plan. We've had a debate about that. So there is other scopes to bring it forward. There is also other elements with Waldermas and Triangle and other sites that you can point at, even though figures and yields have been counted in the figure, in the actual thing, the actual list of proposed sites coming forward in the urban area. All I would suggest is if we get into that game of, okay, I don't want this one for a very good planning reason, we take it out and who do I dump it on? I don't see that as being a genuine way forward, I really don't. But I've got genuine planning reasons why they shouldn't go forward.
I'll remind you that this isn't a planning committee per se, it's looking at strategic sites. Mr. Hunter.
Just to confirm, Oldham Marston Road Triangle is already accounted for in the allocated sites in the safe plan, so it's already within the supply.
Do I have a proposal about which way to approach the improvement of this policy? I've had one suggestion that there might be some words to strengthen this particular policy. I don't know. And look at the reasons for refusal. The officers are quite happy to do that. Do we have anything else? Councillor James?
I would like to propose to the committee that Kiln Farm is taken out of this local plan, and as has been highlighted tonight, that the landowner wishes to develop additional units on Manydown. The planning authority has said that they are going to limit them to 3,080. Therefore, there is scope on Manydown. Therefore, I'd like to see this site removed, and I'd like to make that recommendation to this committee.
Councillor Mitchell.
Has the landowner indicated that he would like to have more site dwellings on Manydown?
Not to officers, no. Not to officers. My understanding is they're doing long-term master planning, but they understand where we are in terms of the allocation.
It's in the MEC's record of minutes, and they.
I'm afraid the MEC means nothing to me, Councillor Harvey. Would you like to
The
explain what it
the Manydown Executive Committee, the
Oh,
Landowner
okay,
Committee,
fine.
have said they want that, and that's their direction of travel. That was
Okay.
their minutes and their accepted decision.
Apparently the officers are not aware of that. Councillor Mrs James has submitted a proposal to the committee that this site is withdrawn and the extra homes to, the allocation of homes to go to the Manydown site. Is that the consensus of the committee? Well, would you like to indicate, if you agree with that proposal, could you so indicate, please? If you disagree with that proposal, would you so indicate, please? Then that proposal's lost. Thank you. Now, is there any more discussion on this particular one? Bearing in mind, we've taken the suggestion from Councillor Harvey that the officers will examine the reasons for refusal to strengthen this particular policy. Councillor Mitchell.
Just going back to the point of what we're here for, which is to discuss the text of the policies, and I just think it's a little difficult to take that members come here having known for weeks that we're going to discuss this now, and having had the text of the policy in front of them, to say, well, we haven't got any things we want to put in now, it should be all investigated. What that means is let's slow everything down, because the committee can't meet again in order to discuss a change policy. We're here to discuss and recommend on these policies. And we can't recommend that this policy is totally rewritten, or that officers do another few weeks' work to do something or other. It's up to members to come here ready to tell us what it is they want done with the policy.
Mrs James.
I was under the impression that the committee would support us, whereas before they supported us and they said that they wanted this site removed, and therefore I thought that we would get support from this committee to have this site removed. Therefore I'm quite surprised that we haven't had that support.
I'll reiterate what I said earlier on. This is a review of strategic sites. We're not looking at the level of planning applications and looking at strategic policies for sites. Planning comes down at my understanding anyway, is planning comes down to the level of master planning and all the context that brings. But Councillor Leake, you want to speak?
Well, I support the view that it should be taken out because it's a nonsense. I mean, in practice, the minister is going to decide whether it's in or out, and once if the minister decides that it shouldn't go ahead, it is going to be extremely difficult for a developer to bring it forward again. Certainly in the very short term, and we have to note that this is a site for development from 2014, i.e. next year, through to 2019. I would have thought that all the arguments that were put forward for the refusal would be repeated and fully supported in that period. I mean, who knows what might happen further down the field. But so I could support taking it out, but it may well happen anyway, but I'm not prepared just to say it can be dumped on Manydown, because I don't know where on Manydown. If somebody actually made a proposal and showed me where it might be, because I also represent those who live in Wootton St Lawrence, and I'm not just going to say, I'll give you carte blanche just to dump more 450 houses right next to my parish, or in my parish. But I do have a lot of sympathy about taking it out.
Councillor Harvey.
I just want to agree with Councillor Leake. I fully appreciate where you're coming from, and of course, you know, I respect your view about the ward as well. It's not just this area you represent the right bit round to Manydown as well. So I'm with you on this. I understand where you're coming from. the issue here is what the landowner is seeking to do, has tried to do. If Pickles gives him the right to do it, when we lose, then obviously the allocation is there and it'll get the right to do it regardless of the appeal. If the appeal is upheld and the developer decides to have a second crack at this, then what we actually write in the policy here, and the permission, if you like, that is given within that, for me, becomes the critical factor. Hence the point about the advice given. And this is not the first time we've said this. We have said this consistently to officers throughout, and in particular our planning officers. And I can't make for the fact that they're not joined up and not been talking to each other. That's a different matter entirely, and there's nothing I can speak to. But the reality is these messages have been very clearly communicated from us, representing and pushing this forward in the way that we have been doing. So I would suggest the planning barrister, the appeal, all the bits I've mentioned, need to be in some way, shape or form in a policy that gives us that security, if this developer gets a second bite of the cherry on this. And I sincerely hope they don't. But in regardless to all of that, I still say that there are logical, clear planning reasons at this strategic level not to allocate this site.
I mean, I suspect my greatest concern is actually if it was dismissed, then what do we bring forward next year in order to satisfy the requirement that that we have to build 748 houses a year? Where are we actually going to build them? So, in a way, having this as a site for 2014-15 is a nonsense, just in case it is refused or dismissed, or whatever the expression is.
Mr. Hunter.
Just to say, in terms of the appeal inspector will be looking at the proposal. So he'll be looking at the proposal that's before him, and will make comments on all of the I think it was 11 reasons for refusal. Obviously, if within there were some very particular points that they pick out, then those may need to be reflected in a policy, and that could be picked up through the consultation, because the consultation period would be during that period when the appeal is being determined. But I want to be clear, the appeal is on the proposal, not of that specific scheme, not on an overriding allocation in a local plan.
Yes, Councillor Hart.
Forgive me, the reality of this, let's just put the jargon. Each of these sites, be it Kennel, be it Razors, they've all got particular developers. It ain't not going to be David Wilson Homes that brings this site forward in a year, 18 months or 2 years' time. It's not going to be Waits who are doing theirs. The developers are the developers, and their proposals and their master plans are reality. So in the context of our strategic level, it must inform, it must shape, and it must guide. And I think that's the conversation we're having. So I really am with Councillor Leake on this, on his direction of travel. I do genuinely see why it's important to do what we need to do here.
The officers have indicated that they are very happy to go through that exercise that you suggested earlier on. Councillor Peach.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I mean, the motion earlier, for me, I cannot support it. I mean, again, we mentioned so many times about, we don't want to dump on other people's sites, but the first thing that was mentioned is essentially dump it on Manydown. It strikes me that the discussions that are going on with the revised policy, that land has its own set of restrictions and issues around how much can be delivered on that site and what can be built on it. Every site in the borough so far we've heard of has problems and restrictions. There's not one clear-cut site that we can really work perfectly on. So I can't accept anything that just dumps on somebody else. That being said, I do agree with the points around the ecology, and if we're keen on protecting our ecology and following the lines of the green infrastructure, perhaps there needs to be something in there about a green corridor. If you want to get specific, then perhaps tie that in the policy. Yeah, as I say, it just strikes me that, there's no way I can support it if it dumps on someone else, full stop.
Councillor Mr. James.
This isn't about dumping on someone. We have a landowner that's coming forward and has actually, in its minutes, actually wants to develop more than we're saying that it can. And in the life of this plan, it's minuted. They're minutes of this council, and very clearly in relation to the judgment against us, there shouldn't be, and there is not, a Chinese wall, and we should be talking to each other. I also will go back on the webcast because we have raised this point as a committee with Andrew, and we did raise that issue of 4,000 units. And I will come back to this meeting with the date that we did that, where we did say that the executive was wanting additional numbers on Many Down, and this plan is saying it wants less. And there was concerns from members of this committee that there was a contradiction from the Many Down executive. So for Andrew to say he knew nothing of this, we have already as members raised that. But just for clarity, I will go through and I will trawl the minutes of the webcast and find the exact date and time when we did have that discussion with Andrew.
Just in terms of this point, I mean, we've made it on a number of occasions. The Many Down judgment was clear that the local planning authority has to do its assessment of whether a site is available, achievable, deliverable, etc. We've done that work. We also need to make sure that that is deliverable. It is for the local planning authority to allocate land and for the local planning authority to advise on what level of development is likely to take place in a plan period. As we've made the point on a number of occasions, our worry is the delivery rate in terms of this particular site, well, in terms of all sites, is that a very high delivery rate of 300 units a year, which is what we're looking at, hasn't been achieved elsewhere. We're going to have to work really hard to achieve that. Anything more than that on this site in that plan period is going to give questions to the inspector as to whether we could deliver the plan in the timescale. I've made that point 5 or 6 times to the committee. I don't want to have to reiterate it again. So, for the record for this evening, that's the position.
That's not what we
Councillor
asked.
Mrs.
That's
James,
not
certainly.
what we asked you earlier on. We said, and you clearly said, I didn't know that the landowner wanted to develop more on the site. And what I'm saying is, we have had that discussion, and you were aware of it, and we have raised that with you. But I will come back and to the committee and tell them when we had that discussion with you, because you have been made aware of our concerns that we have an executive that is saying one thing and a planning authority saying something else, because we've had this debate. As you said, you have given us that answer, but you were aware.
My point is we've had no direct response from the landowners saying to us as a local planning authority we want to deliver 4,000 houses in this plan period. We haven't had a letter to say that. There may have been meetings where those have been minuted, but I'm just being clear that the local planning authority and the landowner, there is a Chinese wall that needs to exist between the two, and we as the local planning authority have to make the assessment as to what and how much should take place on particular sites through the planning process.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. The judgment was pretty clear on the relationship that needs to exist, particularly on Many Down, let alone the other sites. I have to disagree with the officer's interpretation and go back to that judgment, particularly in relation to how you bring Many Down forward. And that was clear that there needed to be a good, strong relationship between the local planning authority and the landowner in bringing it forward appropriately in the context for the reasons the land was bought under the Act. Now, you can talk about it and we can dance around this till our cows come home. The reality is, in a logical sense, this site shouldn't be in here. Many Down is an area. I totally understand where Stephen's coming from saying you don't want it on Many Down. You know, why are we even this idea that we've got to dump it on each other in order to try and get rid of a site that shouldn't be in the first place? I find really, really offensive. But it is the world we're living in, trying to get it somewhere by next week, and that's the actual issue. But the very fact that we're trying to get this to somewhere next week, we're dealing with the very worst of all worlds in that sense, and I find that really a problem. When we're taking forward a site like this that shouldn't be there. It really shouldn't be there for very good, sound reasons. And I'm sure others got just as good reasons for other sites that they would like to see. And that's the issue with this, isn't it? So how we square that circle. I'm not saying you know the answer, Chair, or that the portfolio holder does. But that's the reality. And I could not support this site going forward at the moment in its current form. I really couldn't. And I appreciate what you said, though, because if the officers take on board those other points, then we're going to have to really look very, very closely at this policy, because I can't see anybody taking it out. You voted on this. I wish you didn't. I wish we'd voted to take it out. But if you're going to go ahead with this, then we really do need to hold whoever reads that policy's feet to the fire to make sure we get and protect what we want.
Yeah, there's another two examinations of this, of course, at Cabinet and Council. Councillor Mr. Tucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to support Andrew Hunter in what he has said. With regard to having any extra houses on the Manidown land, as it is now, we're trying to get 3,080 on pieces of land, and we're having to expand the amount of land so that we can put that in, because some of the land cannot be developed as tightly as we would wish, because it has special problems with, is it oil or oil line? Sorry?
Well,
It is a pipeline anyway through it, and also ancient monuments and things like that. So therefore we're having to bring into it some land, which we heard last night Councillor from Oakley speaking very, very strongly against it even being included. Now, to include that just to get to the 3,080, which we're going to have difficulty in managing to develop within the time scale, how in earth can we possibly try and put more houses in Manidown? It is an absolute nonsense. We've got to stick to that figure and go forward on that.
can I suggest that having had it put to the committee and the committee having decided, for good or ill, that we move on from that question and look at the policy. And the question I have here is, given that we did see a lot of issues with that site, which has had a planning application and is under appeal, would it be wise to require that this site has a master planning activity? Are we asking that for all of these allocated sites? I don't think we are. It would seem to me, because there are issues of all sorts with the site, and it seems to me this is the exact place where there ought to be a master planning exercise which engages the developer with the planning authority and with other stakeholders. Have officers got a strong view as to why we can't have a master planning requirement for this site, given its background?
At the beginning of the more general site policy, where the sites are listed, there is a requirement in there, so the preparation of a master plan or development brief in partnership with a landowner involving the local community to be approved by the Borough Council for all of those sites. Yeah.
Councillor Mrs. Cubitt.
Yes, I was just going to introduce the fact that Councillor Tucker's point is completely intellectually different from the point that Andrew Hunter was making. So I don't think she was actually agreeing with what Andrew Hunter was saying, because Andrew Hunter was stating that the planning authority can't build more than 300 deliveries per annum, whereas Councillor Tucker has introduced a completely new approach to Manidown, which is that out of the 333 hectares, we can only build 3,080 dwellings. So I'm slightly concerned if Councillor Tucker believes she is agreeing with Andrew Hunter, because I have always thought the problem the LPA had was the delivery per annum and not the total number of dwellings maxed out at 3,080 on a 333 hectare site for which we purchased for the express purpose under town and country planning for the purposes of building.
Yeah, we're not discussing Manidown per se as a site at the moment. We're trying to discuss this site north of Popley Fields.
I'd just like confirmation from Andrew that my understanding is actually correct, that his rationale for a 3,080 during the plan period is explicitly and specifically to do with delivery per annum, and not that that is the maximum amount that the 333 hectare site can take.
You're right, the delivery rate is related to how much we can deliver in the plan period. As we've always said, there is a wider Manidown area which might deliver more than that in the longer term.
Right, members, I'd like to move on, bearing in mind we have discussed this, I think, quite enough at the moment. Bearing in mind the officers have got a task to look at the appeal information that has been produced, and we'll have another look at this policy. Everybody agreed? Thank you very much. Right, we move on to policy SS2.3. Now we have some speakers. I'm assuming from my indications here that Mr Vaughan, Councillors Durrant and Bell and Councillor Tomlin want to speak on this particular site? Razors Farm? I'll take it from the top. Riddian Vaughan, please. You know how to work it.
Thank you, Chairman. 2 minutes? Not yet. Chairman, thank you, and members. I'm here to speak up for some of the residents who've spoken to me from Bramley and Sheffield, and also as a long-standing resident in the area. The officers' proposals for Bramley and Sheffield are still not acceptable. They remain too much, too fast, and without, we think, the due consideration. Now, homes have got to be built somewhere, sure, but there will be some development in our part of the borough, but given the decrease in the housing requirement from 770 to 748, I believe there is real scope to improve the plan in this area. I would submit that the Bramley NDP allocation and Sol 002 should be removed. There are many reasons, but I've only got 2 minutes. But let me just say that the Sheffield one would be entirely unsuitable, as it takes development over the hill and the ridge and would rapidly roll down towards Wildmoor, removing a strategic gap. If built on, it will have a lasting and unacceptable impact on our local landscape. The Bramley NDP should be removed too, because it is double counting. If there is to be some housing in Bramley Parish, on the edge of the town at Razors and Cufford Farm, there is no need to have any in the village. We're not saying no housing, we're just saying give us a fair deal. This is compounded because Bramley has built more than the borough average over the last 10 years. The growth of 7.63% is far more than the borough average of 5.59. And I provided in the paper I gave you, Chairman, in notes 1 to demonstrate this, and show how Bramley should be given respite when considered against other areas that have grown less. Now, removing the Bramley 200 allocation and and the Sheffield one would be a reduction of 350 homes, and that is well within the 396 surplus that there was from the officer's previous recommendation that approached these sites. So this is achievable. Dealing with strategic gap policy, it has improved, but it needs to go much further, providing Bramley and Sheffield with proper strategic gaps from Basingstoke. And I have provided suggestions for this with pictures 1 and 2 in the paperwork I have given you. And you're about to cut me off.
I am indeed. Thank you very much. And I do acknowledge receipt of your submission, which we will pass on to officers and to the portfolio holder. Councillors Durrant and Bell from Bramley Parish Council. Are you together or one at a time? If you just announce yourself.
Tony Durrant from Bramley Parish Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Firstly, I am representing the Parish Council, and in that respect the Council maintains its previously stated view on development within the entire parish, i.e. respite from more excessive and inappropriate development within the parish during that period. I don't intend to go back over all the detail in the previous submissions. I think we've made our point there and demonstrated the facts. We have, with Razors Farm and Cufford Farm, that's over 800 more homes. That's a 50% increase on the dwellings in the parish, another 50% increase, which is just beyond anything else we have seen in other areas. Regards Razors Farm specifically, we have raised objections through the planning process to the application that's gone through. Again, we've had no reasons to change our views on that. I don't intend to go through. Sufficient to say that the summation of all the points relative to that application was an overall objection. You know how policy has always been at these meetings, that we are just asked for respite for our parish, and we've not stooped to suggesting that housing allocation or sites be dumped on anybody else. We believe it's the responsibility of the council and the officers to fairly and justifiably distribute necessary development to perhaps more suitable and more available sites throughout the borough. We hope our case has been well put, respected, and the process will show respect to the existing residents in Bramley and give us the necessary respite during this plan period. I was going to mention a few things. I was asked by a few residents and as a resident myself to comment on the Mannydown situation, but I think enough has been said on that, and that isn't a reflection necessarily of the parish council's views, so I will leave that out. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bell? And good evening, Mr. Bell, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm representing Parish Council and also as Chair of the Neighbourhood Plan. Bramley Parish Council has throughout asked, with good reason, that Bramley be given respite from development. Looking back to DDN 794, it recognised a considerable expansion of the village in recent years, and it offered the community a much-needed respite during the plan period. From a neighbourhood planning point of view, Bramley has initiated the start of a neighbourhood plan, has government funding and been granted support from planning aid to get the plan in place with a date of October-November 2014 for the referendum. The concern throughout has been the lack of improvement in infrastructure, transport, recreational facilities, shops, schooling, besides the strain on services such as sewage, water that Bramley suffers. Through the neighbourhood plan we would hope to address such problems, but including the housing to the south of the parish, then we endure the prospect of the parish having to absorb 1,010 new dwellings within the planned period. The parish boundary encompassing the area to the south is accepted by Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council as the neighbourhood plan area, and is therefore of great concern to the steering group as to the number of houses that it should consider. Statistics have been supplied time and time again concerning the housing expansion that Bramley has suffered over the past years, so I'm not going to go over those points again. This number of houses being dumped on Bramley, on the parish, the size of Bramley, with poor infrastructure that has to be improved out of all proportions is outrageous when we, parishioners, can see other more suitable sites that can be developed from scratch, which are not being developed to their full potential.
Half a minute.
If this committee is making recommendations to the Cabinet and ignores all points made with reference to increasing housing in Bramley and similar sized parishes which do not have the infrastructure to support such increases at this time, we trust that this Council will support and honour its commitment to neighbourhood planning, and that planning applications by developers within the window of opportunity prior to the local plan and outside of the policies of being laid down by the plan will be rejected. If not, neighbourhood planning from the point of view of housing policy is a waste of our time, and the policies within the paper are not worth the paper they're written on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bell. Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Bell, by the way? Thank you.
Thank you. I have this for you.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you. We'll get it collected from you. Thank you. Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This is specifically some comments that perhaps the committee like to consider on the Razors Farm, which is Basingstoke 107 site. Perhaps the committee might consider that we should think about keeping this as a potential business park extension. Consider also that the access to this site is limited. It's via an industrial park with peak hour congestion and much traffic queuing. Crockford Lane roundabout, that's the Red Army roundabout, is at capacity now, and the proposed primary traffic routes through the site are congested with on-road parking during the working day. We would like to ask you to consider the impact on local businesses. Air Product has shown some concern from the noise it creates, the impact assessment reports it's produced, and of course the danger it has when it handles pressurised gas. It'll clearly be a risk to houses located nearby. We are also aware that some large companies have started to look for sites outside Basingstoke due to increasing traffic issues. Developing this site will only increase the harm. We need to look at the limited transport potential. We've currently got no bus company currently able or willing to divert bus routes. Impact on natural environment. The Basingstoke settlements are currently hidden from the surrounding countryside by the natural topography of the land. Razors Farm would be located, or is currently located, on one side of a ridge that currently obscures Basingstoke. Once houses are built on this sloped land, there's a jagged edge of development with a countryside barrier that cannot be mitigated due to the current identified open field landscape. As Councillor Mitchell mentioned when talking about Manydown, how will we control sort of areas of natural beauty, the guidance? We have to wait for planning committee to make those sort of decisions for us. Also, in this site assessment, it identifies Bramley Camp will avoid the coalescence between Bramley and moving Basingstoke further north. It doesn't really encompass the fact that this camp is out of bounds behind the railway and therefore adds nothing to the local amenity. The camp is also a blocker to any green corridor that we're talking about for larger wildlife
If
due
you
to
will
its
come
security
to an
fencing.
end on this one, please.
And so development will be seen to creep along the north route along Cuffold Lane. And then we need to just consider the infrastructure issues. The residents would benefit from a railway station. That's the Chinham railway station. We haven't seen that, and Railtrack don't have this on their forward strategy. So,
could you wind up, please,
yeah,
Councillor?
I think that really sums up that we have the A33, which is the major capacity problem on the road, and we will see more traffic used in the Chinham domestic roads. Thank you.
Thank you. Question, Councillor James?
Thank you. Can I ask you about, in relation to the policy SS23, can I ask you about I and J? In relation to, I and J, that's about the first one's about, I is about the mitigation impact, and also the second one is about non-car, that's J, non-car transport modes. Do you think in the relation, I know that you've sat in the audience in relation to the presentations we've had on SIL and the transport assessments, what's your view in relation to the ability for us to meet those on what we've been given to date? And particularly I'd like to know your view on what it says here about the non-car modes, which is the public transport and also cycle and walking linked.
Well, firstly, the actual infrastructure development required for the mitigation to Crockford Lane. We've had we all sat through the transport presentation, and interestingly, I looked at the spreadsheet that we've all had about infrastructure requirements and the funding, and so my take on this so far, and this is as up to date as I've got it, is that there's somewhere for the necessary infrastructure missing probably 8 or 9 road junctions where we haven't got any figures for it, and lots of, I think 60 entries in there say that we haven't got an idea where the funding is coming from. It says we want £213 million to do the infrastructure, and again I looked at the SIL presentation that we all received, and working it out quickly about the amount of SIL per square foot of houses and the average number of houses, I can only see about 100 million. So my question and my fear is that we are going to be quite short on the monies that we need to do a lot of this infrastructure development. So therefore, does that mean we'll do it too late? Do we do it at all? And of course, it's not just one roundabout, it's the roundabouts that feed and the whole A33 and then take that all the way through Basingstoke. So I'm fearful of that, and this particular site, having been told it's a 4-lane roundabout with traffic lights, given the fact we're also seeing a pedestrian crossing going in right now for the new Lidl development, that whole area is going to be very tricky for motorists. And then on your second point, the site is quite remote. It's on the business park. It's about 400 or 500 metres to the nearest bus stop in Chinham. It's a long way from the Chinham shopping centre. I can't, and it's also a little bit tucked away. There are no cycle ways through the business park. There are no cycle ways through Chinham other than the Cuffold Lane pedestrian access. So I'm not convinced that this will actually help the diminishment of car transport.
I think you were here last night, and in relation to what Stafford Napier said about SIL and he was given the example of the golf club. But in relation to this site, if your reckoning is that it's going to be very costly to do all of this work in relation to sill, can you see the connection between the likelihood of, in number A, which is that we were likely to have less affordable housing because this site is going to be so expensive? I mean, at the moment we haven't got a figure in there, and I guess in relation to the dubious piece of work that's gone on with this borough, is going to be 30%, not 40. Are we going to likely achieve that? And can you understand that concern, or do you have a concern?
Well, I think to be honest, I don't know the answer, and I do share your concern that clearly the model that we've all been given is that we get sill from those privately sold houses, and there's also this dilemma that we also want those privately sold houses to fund the 30% affordable housing. So I guess it's at risk, and perhaps this is another factor of, I wouldn't like to be in your shoes to make decisions on sites without the full information, and I think you're perhaps asking me for the information, which I sadly can't give you the total answer.
Any more? Councillor Mitchell? This is to Councillor Tomlin.
If the committee doesn't do what you're, I think, asking, which is to take all or some of these sites out of allocation, if the committee doesn't do that, do you have any things you'd like to include or change in the site policies?
See where you're coming from. We don't want to play the game of shifting. Absolutely, yes, absolutely. I think the site is challenged. Again, I'm worried about the mitigation measures, how we might stop exploding gas cylinders from landing on local properties. Again, the noise in the middle of the night. Air Products have told us they've had complaints from clanking their bottles around late at night over at, from Chinham residents. So I don't know how we can ask them to do it more quietly, or do we actually go down that route of everybody has double glazing and don't open your windows in the summer? But it's that sort of thing. The other thing about, I touched on the fact that the site is on the side of a hill. That to me is a fundamental. We've made a bold statement that Basingstoke has come over its banks. It's burst its banks. Again, mitigation on that, I don't know. Trees take a long time to grow. There are some trees there. They're not coniferous, so we're going to lose them in the winter. And so the whole thing comes into open countryside. So I don't know how we can actually, within the remit of the policy, sort of ask this magic wand to cure this. So it doesn't really answer your question in any specifics, but there are some things that, if there were words, we could put in there. But if it's just we must mitigate against it, I just don't have the faith in that happening. It would be nice to make sure that the Crockford Road roundabout is in place from day one, because that would help stop the business park becoming agitated, or their customers becoming agitated about finding other premises. So, yeah.
Councillor Leake, do you have a question?
Yes, it's really, are you therefore saying that paragraph M of this policy is not sufficiently watertight? Is that your concern? I mean, you realise what paragraph M says. So how would you want to strengthen that?
If you remember last night, Councillor Thornton, I think, made the comment that by putting housing behind the business park where there are some vacant sites would actually change it to some extent what potential businesses could then do with their site, because you've now got much closer local people. Acceptable noise standards, that's difficult. What is an acceptable noise standard? I think the rules are, if you have your bedroom window open at night and you live near near a public house, you mustn't get more than 50 decibels in your bedroom for more than 5 minutes. Well, 50 decibels is pretty quiet. So, it's going to cause problems to everybody, even though it would appear that it meets the rules and the regulations, because these things are going to happen. I just think that we are cramming housing too close to industry. And I don't, the policy would be to not do that, to build big earth banks. I don't really see that's going to do it. It's not motorway noise, it's a different type of noise, but I'm not a noise expert, but it's just ensure it isn't firm enough. What if they can't be? Do we suddenly then abandon the site? I don't see how those words work.
Sorry, the whole purpose of this meeting is actually to try and strengthen the particular clause if you feel that it's not adequate, and that's, I'm looking for your guidance. I mean, I don't know the area as well as you do, but I'm sympathetic to the problems, but it seems to me that it covers quite a lot.
I think, yes, there's possibly some of us have a slightly different view of what we thought you were going to be deciding about, and I don't disagree that you have quite clearly said that it's about the policies. Perhaps we thought it was generally about whether the sites were going to be suitable or not, but we've had that debate. Putting the words in, it's ensure. I mean, to my mind, if you ensure, that means you need to put something in to say how do you measure them, what the standard is that you're measuring to, and if they don't achieve them, what action you would do. Now that's getting very detailed, but if a developer does what he thinks is best, we think it's right, and that annoys the residents, it's a bit late. Then it's probably, there must be examples of, I suppose, of what mitigation of noise you can do there, but it's just those things. To my mind, you need something that's an action, a measurable, and a result. So that would be some sort of teeth, perhaps.
Councillor Mrs. Tucker.
How do you compare the noise from the industry with what comes out of the Bramley camp, with the firing that goes on there?
I was hoping to talk to you about Cuffold Farm, and that I would bring it up there if I may. Yes. Thank you.
Any more questions? Councillor Harvey, sorry. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, Chris. In terms of what you were saying before, particularly on Razors in terms of its relationship to Cufford, the link road that was talked about previously, didn't we say that the developer at the moment, in terms of what they're proposing, are arguing that they don't think they need to do the mitigation on the basis of what they're currently proposing, let alone going through the policy as we've currently got it written in front of us?
Yes, my understanding is that the developer of Razors Farm says that the impact of traffic through Taylor's Farm at peak time through a non-relief road is not excessive. I don't know the numbers, but in the peak hours certain numbers, but that's not the residents of Taylor's Farm feeling at all, and there's quite some concern, but I believe that's their stance.
Any more questions? Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. We'll be seeing you shortly, I think. Members. Well, I'll kick it off. I'm not a ward member, but as you know, I'm Chinham ward member, right next door. The business park is within my ward, and there's been discussions about this particular site from probably 3 years ago. What Councillor Tomlin mentioned about the concerns of the business park is very real, which is why the mitigations on the transport, we heard Councillor Harvey mention that link road, is very real for the companies that work in the business park. The number that Councillor Tomlin didn't mention, but we've heard locally 6 companies have engaged relocation experts to investigate the possibility of moving out to Reading, Slough and Bracknell. That, I have to say, without the proper mitigation for this site and for the other sites up there, to look at the traffic that would be generated, we are completely destroying the vision that the Cabinet, the Council has approved of the impact on economy. We're here to build to grow. And it's one of the things that concern me, because one of the ideas of and arguments that I've heard put forward on Razors Farm, oh, well, you've got a business park, you can go to work there. Well, you're not going to work there when the buildings are empty. And 6 major companies are looking to move out of Basingstoke. So that's why we come back to this mitigation, the mitigation on the transport that wasn't implemented for whatever reason by the same developer, by the way, that built Taylor's Farm. Because when I first arrived in Basingstoke, I went straight on the parish council and it was on the plans. And it mysteriously disappeared. Well, now it's coming home to roost, because that would alleviate a traffic flow coming out of a feed into the A33. Now we're into an extremely expensive mitigation solution that we really haven't addressed. We've seen an example in the transportation assessment, but this is just one example. I'm not saying this is unique to just this part of Basingstoke. It's an impact all the way around Basingstoke. But I think it's an example of the challenges that we face trying to identify sites for these particular dwellings. I'm going to pick up the other point, and it's mentioned, and it's in policy M, about the acceptable noise standards. Now, 3 of us have visited Air Products, on their invitation, incidentally. And Air Products is a worldwide company. It's one instantiation of a very, very large international company. They've invested 25 years ago in that particular location because it wasn't near houses. Now, it's a little bit perverse, I suppose is the word to use, that now we're trying to build houses next to a company that actually chose the location because they didn't anticipate houses being put next to it. It's like a lot of these, how can I put it, at-risk businesses. They work at risk because there are international agreements about the protection distances around a location like that with compressed gases. Most of it's inert. Some of it isn't. Some of it's quite, would be described as, I won't say dangerous, but, you know, there are elements, safety elements that have to be imposed because of the use of the particular compounds they use. So there's a discussion going on about the safety distances that have to be complied with. But the last thing we want are people who move into that particular site and then start complaining about the noise in the business park. Where are we going here? So I think that examination and that policy M, noise mitigation measures, good luck. Because if you've ever been anywhere near compressed cylinders, I mean big ones, you know, they're taller than me. You cannot put a muffler around it. You can't encase it in anything. It makes noises. Forklifts, trucks, going back and forth in that big yard. So mitigation, I'm probably a little bit as cynical as a lot of members. Mitigation is a lovely word, but this is where your master planning comes in. I believe they submitted, it's an outline application that's been submitted for Razors Farm at the moment. Well, that will come under examination, and I have a question for the officers. You mentioned, John, that there will be master planning on all the sites. And I'll ask this question, which I've asked about 3 times before. Will that master planning come back to this committee for all the sites that have it indicated for examination?
Yes, they will. The policy says they should be approved by the Borough Council.
Thank you. Now, I hope that was the answer, because there's a message I want to pass on to all councillors that these master plans that have to be submitted start going into the kind of detail that I think we're all interested in on the particular sites. And that's when that examination and scrutiny can take place. Absolutely, Councillor Mitchell.
We're with whatever has already come in. Has somebody already asked for a pre-application engagement panel for it? Because I've not heard anything about it nor seen a date or anything. Maybe the applicants refused to do it.
No, I can say that the applicant, the ward councillors involved in Bramley and in Chinham, we've engaged with the applicant 3 times.
It's just asking, you're not asking for a formal pre-application engagement?
No, because
No, fine. If you're not, you're not. Just
okay. I'm not sure what the engagement we've had differs from that formal pre-application, but it's been. We've raised these points with the developer. That's fine. I too would like to see. I don't know how you can beef up the word mitigate or beef up the word acceptable. I just make the point that I think it's the concern that we all have, I think, in how we can put the words into the policy per site. But it's the transport infrastructure that worries me. You can't put it in here that people are going to move out, but it's the impact of not achieving some of this mitigation is what concerns me. Excuse me for hogging the microphone for a bit, but I have 4 speakers. Councillor Lee.
This site and Cufford Farm are, of course, immediately adjacent to my own ward, so I do have more than a passing interest. I do share the views expressed by Councillor Bierman last night that we really should have a master plan for this site and Cufford Farm. I know it says in little p, ensure it provides for the integration of future development on Cufford Farm, but that might just mean leaving space for a road into Cufford Farm, and I would like it to be strengthened so that we actually refer to a master plan for the 2 sites. I know we've got the master plan reference earlier, but I think in this particular case it's very important that we really do emphasize the importance of a master plan for both sites. And I would ask that everybody supports me on that. My other concern is that within my ward there is the quite magnificent heritage asset of the Vine, and it's only a field and a half away from these 2 sites. And I really would like some reference in both of these policies to the impact on the Vine, and with a particular reference to the policy which used to be EM9 but might have changed, I don't know. Because it is very important that we not only do we mitigate or take action that mitigates against noise and everything else, but also mitigates against the impact on a fantastic National Trust house, and perhaps I should say I'm a member of the National Trust. It is in some places. Yeah. Well, there we are. But I am very concerned that we really do have mitigation, and that we, if anything, we make sure that there's appropriate landscaping to protect the Vine and all the Vine's wonderful assets.
I'll call a pause here. We've got 2 suggestions coming from Councillor Leake to go into the policy. One is the support for the master plan for those 2 sites. Is that the wish of the committee? And the other one is the reference to the impact to the heritage assets of the Vine. 3 policy M9. Well, the numbers have changed, so we're all sort of fumbling in the dark about this. Councillor Raphael.
Chairman, what it's really looking at possible landscaping. That's that might protect.
And the committee is happy with those 2 inputs into this policy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Could I ask, Chairman, that as far as the joint master plan, it being a single master plan for the 2 sites, can we ask the officers what their view on this is? Because it sounds good in paper, you all want to do it, but let's hear what they've got to say, because I don't think it's been mentioned before.
Officers.
in general sense, I don't think there's a problem with it. It's just the point of timing, in the fact that if the site gets a planning permission before then it's already happened. Otherwise, if you've got it in the policy, nothing's happened with the two sites, then it would be sensible to do the work together. It would mean bringing together two different landowners and ourselves to make that happen. I think it's just the point of timing which I would make as identify as the issue.
Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. Totally agree with all that you said. Agree with what Councillor Leafy said as well in the direction of travel on this one. Just a couple of thoughts to add to that. If we're going to look at the situation where, say, Razors Farm does come forward, for whatever reason, DC look at it on the merits set against the old safe policies, and if that happens post the adoption of this plan, then the logical importance and the weight that can be attached to it should give us scope within a policy, to look at the A33 corridor. Now, I appreciate what's been said about these two particular sites, but I think the issue you're going to have with your IDP is unless the A33 corridor is treated as such, then each of those contributors, each of those developers, if you like, making their relevant element to the plan to make it fulfilled, is in question, I think. Now, if, for example, Razors Farm gets approved, or if they try through whatever reason to take it to appeal, the issue is that will it contribute to the A33 corridor as set out in our IDP? Now, if they go ahead and we're left with Cufford farmers in that same boat as well, the problem I've got at the moment is it's site by site. It's isolated on the basis of the merits that they are arguing, hence the point that they don't even think they have to meet, but we've set out in our IDP. So here we have a developer saying, hey guys, I'm going ahead now, I'm going to run for the goalpost to try and beat you, and I can argue that I don't have to do what you tell me I have to do in your own local plan. Now I've got a fundamental problem with that. So, if you're going to look strategically, I really do support what you're saying, but I think strategically it has to be the A33 corridor, and it has to be contextual to the IDP. It has to be that the policy is strong enough, because they ain't going to do this voluntarily. Not a single one of those developers and landowners will do this voluntarily. They're going to have to be dragged kicking and screaming in some way, shape or form to give us the mitigation that is needed to not result in God knows what damage being done on these sites individually. The other point to make about the business park, and this is very relevant to our experience on Hounds Mills, is you can stick a bund down one side of the business park and have the residents on the other side, but it doesn't do you much good. The relationship we have between Millard and Osborne Close and Hounds Mills is a very interesting one and a difficult one, and the casework that's generated as a result of that is huge. And I think in the sense of yourself and what you've said, I think those residents that would be put there will complain. And if we lose 6 businesses, if we genuinely lose 6 businesses as a result of this local plan, talk about take both aim at both feet and shoot them off at once. I mean, it would be utterly ludicrous. So what in the world are we doing allocating this in the way it's being allocated in the first place? If that's actually the reaction we've got, somewhere someone's got to have the nous to realise that, square the circle and deal with it. Because if that's left to run, by the time we approve this and by the time Razors Farm goes through, will any of those businesses have left? I mean, we're risking, real employment opportunity here that we shouldn't be risking. So I agree with you, and I hope others are listening and will take action accordingly, really.
Yeah, and the point I was making is purely and simply a traffic problem. Because they've had enough. They have dreadful troubles getting out of there now. Councillor Cubitt.
I think some very good points have been made by a number of members, but I'm particularly interested in the chairman's comments about, well, good luck, because I don't know how they're going to mitigate. Well, I mean, it's up to us as this committee to try and help the portfolio holder to find an alternative way through these policies. And if all of us are in agreement that none of the policies protect the current quality of life of our residents, let alone the future quality of life of future residents, then we've got to come up with something, and we've got to do it now and not just say good luck, because we know the master plan's not going to resolve the problem, and we know at the moment there isn't a big enough protection here for the current quality of life of residents. Therefore we have to come up with something tonight that we can put in these policies that isn't a motherhood and apple pie statement like, oh, well, we'll include mitigation measures, because as we've all agreed tonight, we don't know what it means, we don't believe the costs we've been told, and when it's promised in the past, it's never come.
Well, I wasn't sure it was a question to me, but in the word, we've got used to seeing the word mitigate. I don't know of another word because mitigation is different in each individual case that's referred to in the line of the policy. Mitigation for the Great Crested Newt, for instance, is very different from the mitigation of the noise from a gas company. So it's a useful word to use in every particular case, but it's the detail which we come back to master planning. I've got Councillor Mrs. James first. Councillor Harvey, do you want to still speak?
Can I pick up on the word? And in relation to M, I wanted to speak on M in relation to the policy. In relation to our save policies, at the moment, we've got, I think it's C2, isn't it, in the link between existing employment sites and any new development. Is it EC2? And what? And at the moment, if we have any new development, that existing policy that we have at the moment, it shouldn't impact on existing employment sites. I don't know in relation to the local plan and the employment policy we have, does it make reference to that, Andrew, and does it therefore protect existing employment sites? Because we will get situations where, and we see that in relation to the Eli Lilly site and the Lemon Land coming along, and Sainsbury's had real concerns and objected because they had concerns that their 24 hours a day, 7 days a week site and the noise it was going to make and the impact it would have on on the new development. And whatever we say, that new development eventually will complain. So I don't know whether our new employment policy picks up that existing point, and I think it should, because you're never going to be able to mitigate from it, and in the end, it would be absolutely appalling if we have a situation where development actually impacts on the economic viability of this town. So my first question is around, does the new employment policy pick up on that?
Looking for the answer.
EP2, and we discussed this the other night, but I think there's a point in there would be no harm to business function of neighbouring uses or the employment areas as a result of development. So that's in EP2. Whether that's, I can't remember what the amendments to that were that have gone on to Cabinet, but EP2 in terms of alternative uses, employment and employment sites.
So is it that really this committee wants to strengthen that policy? So if you're really wanting to consider M in relation to this site, you need to go back to the employment policy to ensure that that gas cylinder company is protected, because it won't be protected. So you need to reflect on the employment policy. So what you need to do at each point, and I think it was raised last night with Councillor Horrocks Mitchell was saying, these comments aren't in isolation. They should link to policy, existing policy, and this obviously M should link to existing employment policy.
Sorry, a point of clarification. I was looking for that particular thing. I didn't read the first part, but that actually is in relation to retail and leisure uses, not residential. It's uses that you might find in an employment site. I think if there was a particular matter that people wanted to add into the policy for Razors Farm about protecting the particular business, then you could do it through that. But it's not as I thought it was in that policy, because that's related to employment-related uses, not residential.
But it wasn't our saved policies, because I remember it particularly using it when challenging the Eli Lilly site and the concerns I had. So if it's not there, what did it used to say, and can we put it back in? What does it say, Mark?
Just in terms of the save policy, that's referring to the reuse of employment sites for alternative uses. That makes sense. So this situation is obviously different because you're looking at a neighbouring use rather than the existing employment use.
But it did in that policy also talked about neighbouring, so it said something around, because it talked about the sidings, and it said that any future development shouldn't impact on neighbouring employment. So in relation to a new development, it shouldn't impact on. We need to capture that in relation to our employment.
Maybe I can help out here. We're talking about M. We're talking about M. Ensure acceptable noise standards can be met within homes and amenity areas to noise mitigation in light of the adjacent. What we're doing here is we're actually imposing standards for housing. Is that the way I read M? So without, I think the words are now, without detrimental effects, would probably strengthen that up to the business. Yeah, can I finish, please, Councillor Cubitt? Without detrimental effect to the existing businesses within the Chinham Business Park. Would that work? And would the committee go along with that? This is on for this particular. Yeah, we'll get a read back on it. Yeah.
Without detrimental effect to the existing businesses within the Chinham Business Park.
I would suggest that would be inserted. Ensure acceptable noise standards can be met within homes and amenity areas through suitable noise mitigation measures, and then add in this without. And then you can put in an and in light of the adjacent railway line and business park. I think that flows. Or take out including the railway line. Yeah, Karen, can we see what we end up with here, please?
This is a challenge, isn't it? So little m would read, ensure acceptable noise standards can be met within homes and amenity areas through suitable noise mitigation measures without detrimental effect to the existing businesses within the Chinham Business Park and in light of the adjacent railway line.
Right. And delete the last
and
bit.
delete the last bit.
Would that work, or have we got another suggestion? Okay, let's start Councillor Cubitt, then Councillor.
If you lift D out and put that into Razors, then it works perfectly. So it's not. It's perfectly worded to achieve what you're looking for. It's already replicated in EP2, but it's not relevant because EP2 is explicitly to do with retail and leisure. So should read as a separate letter. There would be no harm to the business function of neighbouring uses or the employment area, neighbouring employment areas as a result of this development. Bang, achieves it. 129. So basically, you're replicating it because you can't use EP2, but you can replicate the words and apply it to the said site.
understood. Let's see. How would that work? In principle, Joan?
Oh, sorry.
In principle, what Councillor Cubitt said would be fine. You just have to amend it slightly to refer to Chinham Business Park, but it would be okay.
Right, we're sort of doing a bit of wordsmithing on the fly here, but Councillor Gardner?
While the wordsmithing is going on, I think the main problem is not putting up a bund or trying to get mitigation factors. It's what is needed is a suitable strategic gap between the business area and the residential development, and that needs to be built into the master planning.
Yeah, I think what we've got to be careful about is coming up with a solution. This is one reason, mitigation, but making it more specific in here of what we mean, what has got to be mitigated against one another. That would be a good solution in the master planning, I quite agree. But I don't think it lives in the policy. Right, is the committee happy with that, with the wordings? And thank you for your contribution, Councillor Cubitt. Thank you. Got that one. Councillor Mitchell, did you want to carry on?
Yes, I'm back to master planning, and I'm glad we have got to the point of saying that I'd like to say at the general level that where there are two adjacent sites, and I mean adjacent, may not be contiguous, just adjacent, two or more adjacent sites, the master planning should apply to the set of sites. But I have a question in that connection that let's assume that the plan goes through and we haven't had a successful planning application on a site, so the sites are still as allocated. What leverage or leverage, I'm sure it's the Americans say leverage is leverage, what leverage do we have to cause the master planning to take place, given that the pressure is always to get development going and catch up with the 5-year land supply? I mean, we had this, Keith will remember that we had this on sites in the past where it said wonderfully in the plan there's going to be master planning. No master planning ever took place. A planning application comes in and it's whose fault is it? No master planning took place. I mean, I just have a concern that the council should be active in initiating master planning, but I'm wondering who is responsible to whom, and how does the committee or DC or cabinet or the council, how does the council get a grip of getting master planning off the ground and going? With many down, we're doing it because we are the landowner and because we've got a rein interest in what happens there, but how do we get it going in other sites? And is it something we can somehow influence?
I think it would be for officers in our team to do that, in terms of you'd be looking particularly at the sites which were coming early in the local plan process. We would be engaging with the landowners to make sure that those landowners were engaged in that process. If, for instance, they didn't want to take part, that would be an issue that we would have to overcome, and it may be that we would use our internal resources to do our own master planning. We have urban design skills to do that. The preference would be to work in partnership, and we would have to prioritise those as they, the longer term plans would take longer, bigger sites, but the smaller scale stuff we'd have to get on and underway so that the 5-year land supply would be put in place, and we've got mechanisms to then accept planning applications.
Can I then reiterate what I think was said quite a long time ago, that we should ask the portfolio holder to please look at the resource implications of that now, look forward and look at the resources available to the council and the budget available to the council, because I've got a feeling that in the end, if we don't initiate it, developers won't want to go through all this process if they can avoid it. I think they're wonderful people, developers, unlike some, but they're not that wonderful that they won't do things that they don't have to do. And I think we need to be on the front foot. So I think will committee agree to send a message to the portfolio to that effect?
Agreed. Well, are you agreeing or not with Councillor?
Yeah, I think the point is well made, and I remember a presentation that we had at LSP 5 years ago by the Red or Dead guy about how we capitulated on a number of developments in Basingstoke, and that we didn't need to, that we're always giving in at the 11th hour and not getting what we want and what we deserve. So I think the point being well made is that maybe we should have within the policy that we can rescind a strategic site allocation in the event that the developer refuses to engage in the master plan process. And maybe and that was the point I was trying to elicit from the chair when he said, well, mitigation's great, but it's meaningless. Is that, actually we need a bit of a stick available within our plan to ensure that we don't get in the same place that we've got before, on the Taylor's farm where that road ain't been built, or the hall hasn't been built, or the whatever's not built that's been promised. We've got to be able to rescind further phasing on strategic allocations in the event that the developer doesn't play ball with us, because this is our borough, these are our residents, and we know what's good, and therefore we don't want people taking the Michael out of us.
I mean, obviously, the whole purpose of the policy is to direct on those particular points. I think it's through the planning process, those things get addressed through the Development Control Committee ultimately. But the intention, and my experience from elsewhere, is that developers, particularly of larger sites, are willing to work on master plans because they see the benefit of it, and it helps inform the planning applications that come through that process. To say that you would rescind an allocation, I don't think is something you could put in a plan. Once it's allocated, it's allocated. You're saying that that's where development would take place. You would just want your policy to be clear on what you would expect the developer to be doing, so the points that are in here, and that they would have to do master planning. Ultimately, we'd have to work within the framework of the MPPF, and if particular sites came forward, we had no 5-year land supply, and developer hadn't done the work on a master plan, then we would have to consider it in that remit. But the key point is that we would want them to do master planning. We would encourage them to do that, and we would see that as a delivery mechanism for those sites and the involvement of the communities in doing so.
Thank you. Councillor Mission.
I was intrigued with this site, and now call it the site because it's one area with a line between it, with 870 dwellings in total. I asked the question yesterday about shops and about the viability, what sort of shops, and viability where we put in community facilities and shopping and so forth. I'm intrigued by the fact that on this particular set of 870 dwellings, we don't seem to ask for any community facilities at all. Is that because we think that they are part and parcel of something else and will happily go to somewhere else for all their community activities? They won't become any sort of little area of their own which wants to have a meeting somewhere or anything like that. Where are we on that sort of question of these two sites?
I think it's best to say that the policies have been informed by colleagues within the council. So in terms of the community buildings, we've spoken to those responsible for community buildings to look at the proximity of other buildings nearby and the scope to accommodate further population within those.
Could I just point out that it actually says provide a layout which addresses the potential isolation of the site. So, I mean, how neighbouring community for...
I mean, just looking at the layout and the question of roads and traffic and all those sorts of things, it seems to me that if I were living on the far edge of the Cufford farm, area of this area, I've got a long walk, or cycle or drive to somewhere to my community facility. I mean, I'm in a parish, but my parish that I live in has two community halls in the parish because it's a spread out and distributed parish. I'm not saying we should stuff it in if it's inappropriate, and I'm sure you've had brilliant advice, but I'm just a bit worried about these 870 people and their parish and parish council. If the parish council wants to have a meeting with the people in a particular ward, which might get warded if it's not already with this huge number of people, where would they drag them all kicking and screaming to, wherever the community facility is? Just maybe that question should be re-asked, given that we are talking about 870 dwellings in one place, which is somewhat cut off from its neighbours.
I'd like to come back to I think it was the suggestion from Councillor Mitchell on, it wasn't about master planning. We captured one. Joint master plan for both sites, we got that. There was another point you were making?
What I was looking for is a general statement that says where sites are adjacent or contiguous, then the sites together should be planned.
Yes.
That the master planning should address the collection of sites. I know that makes life more difficult, but that's our job as a council. Our job is to look at what this is going to be like when it's developed. And if you've got two developers with two quite different ideas coming up with two different master plans, you're going to be banging heads together and failing, and the pressure gets on, and you've got to get them through, and we get two planning applications, never the twain shall meet, and they've both met the theoretical requirements without meeting the practical requirements. For example, if community services said, well, the best place to have a community would be on the boundary, that's a master planning issue, isn't it?
We're actually tripping over from Razor's Farm to Coffle Farm because I think a lot of these particular community issues are identical. There are no shops, by the way, north of the small multi one-stop shop in Chinham. There is nothing north of that, and nothing planned. You've got no problem about convincing, certainly me as a ward councillor, but coming back to the policies, these two particular sites are linked. And I think somewhere, I don't know how we want to work it in, there should be an additional paragraph in here about community services. And community and essential services, I believe they're described as in the policies. And leave it at that, because that should come out. Pardon? Yes, but if you look at the geography and the distances, they would not serve Cuffold Farm and Razor's Farm. Thank you for that, Mr. Cubitt. But I think it needs to be identified, I think, as a separate entry in one or the other, mentioning both about the provision of community services and essential services. Would the committee accept that as an inclusion? Thank you. Can we move now, if we're going to shift the focus, because I think I'd like to... Councillor Leake, I've got to move this on, otherwise you're going to be here to middle and the clock.
I know you have
this
to.
rate.
Councillor Mitchell made a very good point about master plans for joint or contiguous...
We've got that.
Sorry, where are you putting that? Sorry, is that going under, because the ideal place is under Greenfield site allocations, because that's where we first mentioned master plans.
Under the general policies, because there could be many of these adjacent sites. Yeah. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. On that point, can I get a view from the officers as to whether a policy on master planning or an SPD on master planning that defined the process would be the best way of going about it? 3 quick points. 1, most developers' master planning behind closed doors in their own context, I think, is very different to the master planning that we're talking about, where it should be open and transparent. The four elements are community, obviously the developer themselves, the council, and then the local planning authority. Because the local planning authority does need to have its distance and appropriate. So there's the four relationships that we need to think about there. And can I just say, in terms of if there's going to be an SPD, there needs to be an element of compulsion. So how you achieve it, that stipulation, whichever appropriate language. There are exceptional developers out there. There are very good developers who do this and do work with local authorities. Some of those developers don't happen to be the ones that we're dealing with. So in the context of how we achieve our end result, I really just want to, if an SPD works, it needs to have teeth. Do the officers think it can? And is there a toolbox approach? Because I've seen very good master planning SPDs in other authorities where they create a toolbox approach for developers to follow with them before, because as ever, that first little bit that the developer does themselves behind their own doors with their own experts and their own architects and their own landscape people and so on, 9 times out of 10 you're playing around the edges. So if we're going to talk about doing some fundamental master planning, I just want to understand the context of that. And finally, just a quick one on raises before you go, just for the officers. As I understand it, it's gone past its 16 weeks, so I presume they could try for non-determination if they wanted to.
In terms of the master planning thing, I think we just need to think about what the best mechanism for that would be, because an SPD can take some time to get through a process, and we want to move quite quickly on this. So it may be that it might be something more of a protocol, or I don't know. I think it's something for us to think about, but I don't think it's a problem setting out what the council wants and what it expects to a developer, and how they would expect that relationship to emerge, and how a master plan would be set out. I don't think that's a problem. We just have to, I think, just need a bit of thought of what's the best mechanism for doing that.
Right, I'm going to move on to Cuffle Farm, but without losing some of the context we put for Razors Farm. That is noted, and we did address it at the time. I'm coming back to Bramley speakers again. Is Mr. Vaughan still here? No. Councillors Dorrington Bell? Quick. Fine. Thank you very much. Councillor Tomlin on Cuffle Farm?
Thank you, Chair. Over the past 2 years, we've had many documents concerning site assessment of this particular site. It was originally, of course, a reserve site. In discussion and with these papers, it concluded that this site does not relate well to existing settlements. It would not create a more integrated settlement. This extension to Basingstoke would project northward of the town in a manner inconsistent with the existing compact shape of the town and offer limited opportunities to be defined by strong boundaries. The site is located remotely from the A33 corridor and is accessed via the very narrow country lane of Cuffold Lane to the north. It is effectively an island site relying on other sites and therefore scores a strongly negative transport assessment. During members' discussions at the previous P&I for the previous years, the following issues of relevance were mentioned. The site forms part of a strategic gap between Bramley and Basingstoke town. The presumption should be against development. Members remain concerned that the location of the site between Bramley and Basingstoke could close the gap between the settlements. The latest work on our policy EM2, I think it is, for strategic gaps, has drawn a line through this site to indicate a strategic gap area, but it is far too insular and small. Officers cite that the MOD land as an existing strategic gap between Bramley and Basingstoke, but as I said earlier, it's long, narrow, and it's only partly to one side of Bramley and Basingstoke. We have no control of what the MOD will want to do with this land in the future, and I doubt they will accept it as a strategic gap. It was noted that the site currently contributes to the rural economy. Its land quality has been assessed at the second highest level. Should we see development, then a loss of a commercial agricultural business will take place with subsequent loss of rural employment opportunities. This site has an existing residential agricultural business used as a learning centre and is seen as an essential building block for Hampshire agriculture.
Half a minute.
The National Trust has recently warned that we need 10,000 more people to become farmers, so we could risk losing it. Member stated the road access is dangerous. Cuffold Lane is impossible to address. It's very narrow. It's part of a national cycle network. This proposal would further impact on safety. Now, environmental conditions would be poor. There's noise from the Bramley MOD camp. I said I'd come back to this point. The MOD, and the RAF from Odium have said, as far as they plan for the future, it's an indefinite plan to keep using the site for Chinook exercises. Now, this site is directly under the flight paths used by the Chinooks and therefore will be subjected to the noise levels associated with late evening and early hours of the morning repeat low circling by these aircraft.
If you could.
Okay, this issue will not be able to be mitigated by a single developer. And then basically, if we're talking policies, I would ask for mitigation on the effects to Bramley to be considered from the increased traffic using Cuffold Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Any questions? Councillor Harley.
Chris, just thinking about what you said before on that again, where would you see the distribution of houses on the site as being appropriate in the context of what you're saying, just from a distribution point of view?
I believe, well, this is owned by the county council, the land, the farm. They had produced I'd seen sight of a site development proposal by, I think, the company putting this forward. And it had showed three options, and one of them, interestingly, had said to try and maintain the line of Basingstoke from Taylor's Farm and keep all the development quite very much to the south, so that if it does come with Razors Farm, it's almost seen as an extended part of Razors Farm rather than a site added to Razors Farm to make the two sites, if you see the subtle difference, sort of keeping the houses tighter to that bottom edge.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Councillor. I was going to ask you about the Chinooks, because as a previous Cleaver Ward councillor, Bramley was very much a concern of mine, and I had frequent phone calls from residents of Bramley regarding the noise. What's the current situation with the noise levels around Bramley?
The actual Bramley MOD camp is used for ground, if you like, troop exercises, and they do have policies of not setting off bombs and shooting ammunition blanks, hopefully, luckily, at earlier than 7 o'clock in the morning, and they have to announce when they're going to do nighttime work. So there is a background noise, but it is not particularly excessive. There is a shooting range every Sunday morning, so you hear, it's like they've got one bullet and they fire it and someone picks it up and fires it again. So there's this continuous, perhaps it's a cutback, but they're popping away generally. But the problem that residents have, Taylor's Farm, to some extent Chinham, and residents along the fence of the camp, is that the Chinooks have to practice, and we all know the reasons why. They practice circles, landing. They need to do it at night, they need to do it during the day, and they have to access, I think, 3 areas of the camp, because the camp is divided to A, B and C, and they get permission to use one particular area for safety grounds so they don't trip over anybody else. And when they use the southern part, they circle and approach it within 100 feet over Taylor's Farm and the local Cuffold Farm area. In fact, they use Cuffold Farm because it's farmland and it's therefore not got too many houses associated with it. So the noise is not mitigated by having good fitting windows. It penetrates, it shakes houses. It's a Chinook. And the problem is at night that even in the summer, obviously you have the windows open, but at night, I'm sure residents, or some residents, and if you look at the Heathrow flight path, you'll get lots of cases of illness due to lack of sleep. And I'm just wondering that if we start to put 800 odd houses, 350 for the actual Cuffold Farm, under a flight path like that, where we cannot, even though it says that this can be dealt with by the environmental health, they have no jurisdiction over the military, or if they do, no one ever exercises it. So it's a necessary training ground. It will continue for the foreseeable future, and Odium itself is having the pleasure of, I believe, a lot of Benson's helicopters, so it's going to get bigger as a base, and it's also got some new Chinooks, and it's got a role to play in the world, so it's going to carry on. And I'm sure whoever develops the site will not put that in their brochure.
Certainly.
Sound certainly travels not just at night, because when they are shooting in the Bramley training camp, you can hear them in Pamber Heath. So you're certainly going to hear them in Razor's Farm. So I think that even the low-level noise that you've talked about will still be heard. But the Chinooks make a very loud noise late at night, and it is a problem, I believe, in Bramley now, and the new development is going to be just as bad.
Any more questions, Councillor Tomlin? Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. Councillor Mitchell.
I was just going to ask whether you've got a view on this question of, assuming we build 800, or somebody builds 870 houses here, do they or don't they need some sort of local facility within that area, or are they, is it appropriate that they go off to wherever they go off? What do you have a view?
Well, it's a very good point you make about communities, because there is this identity of who do they belong to. In not totally close proximity, you've got Taylor's Farm, you've got a community centre. Deeper into Chinham, you've got a community centre which is twice the distance away, and then you've got Bramley with its village hall and facilities there, which is 1.5 miles, 2 miles up the road. So one would say that this is clearly faced with having a new identity of a community. Whether that would be accepted in Taylor's Farm, because that's the closest, literally the closest to the eastern edge, but those on the west might find it a long way to go. So it would make sense to put something on that site for sure. I believe a school, or the provision for a school, is being discussed on Cuffold Farm site, but not the Taylor's Farm, but not the Razor's Farm site. Sorry, does that answer your?
I mean, yes, in particular, because we're now saying that if they go ahead, they should be seen as being a development from a planning point of view, from a master planning point of view. And if there is talk of a school, then clearly that, if there's going to be a school, there's the opportunity to make a community facility of some sort. I was just interested that it's not mentioned in here, and that the parish council haven't said anything about it. So I've assumed that it's nobody's interested. Thank you.
School is in there, yes.
Well, in that, if we're going to make facility for a school, in the modern era, it's damn silly to build a school and not have any community facilities associated with the school. I mean, and I hope we managed to put in some rules that say schools have sensible parking and turning and drop-off facilities. Let's keep room.
Thank you, Councillor Tomlin. I'd just like to add a bit more, because Councillor Tomlin and I are fairly close to people at RAF Odium. Quite true about the Chinooks. The other, and it is of material interest that the helicopter spin around that's going on at the moment, there's 22 more Chinooks coming in. The Merlins that you probably hear that don't sound like Chinooks, they're very, very big helicopters anyway. And the aircraft from Middle Wallop, the Army helicopters are small, there's two types that come in. They will still use Bramley. Statement of fact. Night and day. Bramley ground is used 363 days a year by mainly MOD, all three services, and the police from all over the country. So it's a national training asset for the armed forces. So it isn't going to go away. The land is so contaminated it could never, ever, ever be used for building. And I'm sorry, I can't agree with the word mitigation in there, because there is no mitigation. Please, somebody tell me who put the word mitigate in there against the MOD land. I don't know of anything that can mitigate a helicopter. There you go. There you go. Right, members, I'm going to let you know that I'm going to try and keep this down to about 15 minutes a site, because otherwise, bearing in mind the sites we've got to get through, we're going to be here till about 11 o'clock. If we can, probably a bit further past that. Now, if you want a quick 5-minute break, now, comfort break, I'll give it to you, then we're going to crack on and see if we can stick to this limit. Thank you. Members, can we reconvene, please? Members, we moved on to Cufford Farm. Is there any other discussion on points on the policy issues on Cufford Farm? I have one question of the officers, because I don't understand it. Is in F, Cufford Farm, improvements, it's to do with the development of the local road network, and the safeguarded link road at Schofield Park. Please, could you explain to me what that is?
Yeah, it's the link between Sherfield Park and Cufford Lane, which is along Gauger Avenue. So the county have been doing work on that with looking at feasibility of that particular route, and it's one of the ones that's tested through our transport assessment.
Thank you. We have no agreed changes to the policy on Cufford Farm. Are there any contributions other than the ones from Razor's Farm that sort of match across? Is that okay, Councillor Harvey? Right, I'm going to move on to Kennel Farm. I have speakers for Kennel Farm. I'll run down this list. I have Julia Vassi. Would you like to come up to the table, please? The floor is yours, big button, and you have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The Kemp Shotton District Residents Association represents over 500 paid-up households. We object to the inclusion of Kennel Farm in the local plan for a number of reasons, but I refer to mainly two this evening. Firstly, the site's inclusion at this stage would be premature, pending the preparation of the proposed Manydown master plan and the outcome of work into the provision of a western bypass. Secondly, there is one overriding reason for not including the site in the plan. Development here would for the first time breach the town's ridgeline in a very prominent location, to the great detriment of the future of Basingstoke. As concluded in 1997 by the inspector who took the public inquiry into the then local plan, development in this southwest part of Basingstoke would breach the ridgeline and be severely detrimental to the rural setting of Basingstoke, and would have an unacceptable, harmful effect on the character and appearance of the rural landscape. Development would very effectively erode the dramatic transition from a completely rural environment that provides such a valuable aspect of the setting of the town. Once the ridgeline is breached, in this location there will be no stopping further development to the southwest towards Dummer, North Waltham and Oakley. If this site, together with the golf course, is progressed into the plan, how long will it be before planning applications are submitted for large distribution warehouses around Junction 7 of the M3 motorway? I would further remind the committee of Stafford Napier's comments yesterday about the infrastructure, and all of that applies. This site is right next to the A30 and needs all that development as well.
If you could,
thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor Ms. James?
When this site went to DC, did you object to this site?
As far as I'm aware, yes, the Residents Association did.
And did you know that it's gone to appeal?
Personally, no, I'm sorry, but I'm sure somebody did.
Councillor Leake?
Are you aware that in the same plan to which you referred, the inspector said there should be no development north of the ridge overlooking Sherburn St John, but that was easily overridden in the next plan. I'm afraid I wouldn't rely on what inspectors say in earlier plans. I'm afraid it's no protection whatsoever.
Councillor Mitchell.
If the site is included in the allocations, do you have any comments on the policies that are proposed to apply to the site?
Could you be more specific about the policies, please?
Well, they're in the agenda for tonight's meeting. I mean, there's a page of them. I can't read them out to you. I'm not aware of what's on the agenda.
Thank you very much. Julian Jones.
I'm Julian Jones, Chairman of Dummer Parish Council, and this site is within the parish. It's on the ridge line, as has been stated, and impacts the long views to and from the AONB. That point has never been addressed. The site's unsustainable. It will be a dormitory for other centres connected by the M3. It's poorly connected to the other communities in Kempshott and Beggarwood. If a link road is constructed through Old Down, which is the only land owned and controlled by the borough that connects Many Down to the A30, the community will be totally isolated by this road and the very busy A30, which will also carry the link road traffic. An application for 310 houses was refused by the planning committee, though it's now subject to appeal. I'll not state the high transport infrastructure costs associated with the Kempshott and Brighton Hill roundabouts and the connecting highways. I repeat that the modal switch to public transport would have very little impact on congestion, and the topology of this landscape means cycling isn't practical. This site shouldn't be allocated until the route of the link road or the western bypass to the M3 Junction 7 has been decided, since any reference to the road will require the inspector to investigate evidence regarding the feasibility of the potential site. Demand for school places for Hatch Warren and Beggarwood already exceeds capacity. Construction of 250 houses on this site would exacerbate the situation and increase traffic congestion on the A30, as if developer contributions are used to accommodate children at other schools elsewhere in the urban area. In addition, there are infrastructure costs for the additional light-controlled access to the A30, which will be even worse if the link road's constructed, and for the pumping of sewage to the Hatch Warren sewer, and the mitigation of the downstream constraints in the sewer on the Winchester Road. This site should be removed from the plan submission.
Thank you very much. Any questions, members? Councillor Mitchell.
Could you just explain the issue at the downstream sewer? What exactly is the issue there?
My understanding is that at the moment it's a 30-centimetre sewer, and the Thames Water have judged that it needs to be a 40-centimetre sewer. There are 2 points on the Winchester Road, I think, in the area of B&Q, that section of the A30.
Thank you very much, Julian.
Just so I think that is related to also the fact that that sewer is used by surface water as well.
Thank you very much. Richard Tanner. Richard Tanner not here? Yes, I know he spoke last night. He's still down for Kennel Farm. Okay, I have no other speakers for Kennel Farm. Members, Councillor Harvey.
Just to pick up a point on little E, Chair, from colleagues that have made comments from the public. Little E, in terms of the Kempshott Residents Association, I think it's fair to say here that we need to add in here a bit about has a detrimental effect on Old Down. the thousands of volunteer hours that have gone in, we need to reflect Old Down in some way, shape or form, in a better way, I think, in the proposal. I do remember others have come to speak to us before about the need to protect Old Down, and the other aspect of this is obviously the ancient woodland in the context of the buffer zone that was spoken about previously. The only thing I would just add to all of that is where the policy framework sits, again, with the surrounding sites coming forward. It's a bit like, it is a little, in a sense, obviously we're dealing with less sites than we're dealing with around Chinham, and we're certainly not dealing with a many down scale, but nonetheless the relationship needs to exist in terms of the A30 corridor. So I would still make the same point about master planning that we've made with the other sites. If it's relevant here, it should be just as applicable.
I think we've grasped this master planning thing now to cover those sites that it would be appropriate to. Yeah. Okay. You mentioned, just before I move on to Councillor Gary Watts, Councillor Harvey, you did mention E. Do you have any words that you'd like to get inserted in there about Old Down? And would the, well, when we hear the words, we'll see if the committee will go along with it. Thank you very much, Councillor Gary Watts.
Chair, I'll just echo Councillor Harvey said about Old Down. I think this committee actually moved a policy that we would have a 50-metre exclusion zone around Kennel Farm, so there's no reference to that in the policy. I agree with the speakers, this would be totally inappropriate. It would be an isolated site and still on the infrastructure which we have on the A30 until you get the master plan, it's just a no-goer. And when the planning application did go forward, we talked about schools, and they were going to shift all the school places east, and we're going to find an extra 380 spaces in Parkview within the South Ham ward. So they're going to move the Kempshot kids, we're going to move to South Ham, and the kids from Kennel Farm are going to go to the Kempshot schools. But there's no reference in the policy to about schools and infrastructure. And I think we certainly need something in there. I know I can't remember what the phasing was, but I noticed the one with the golf course. There is plans in there for a primary school in there, and I can't remember the phasing. But again, our policy on schools it shows short term. I mean, we closed down Beachdown School 10 years ago or so. Again, it's not in a million miles away from this area. And we have no joined up thinking when it comes to schools and infrastructure. And I just agree with the residents have spoken. I just think it's isolated, and the Old Down is a wonderful area looked after by volunteers, and it'll be a shame for that area to be spoilt by an isolated development like this.
Well, hopefully we'll get some words from Councillor Harvey in a second. Schools. The question's been asked by a member. Do we have a response to that for this particular site?
Yes, Chair. It's a response from the County Council, and it's set out in the IDP, and that is that children from this school would be expected to be accommodated in the Parkview infant and junior schools, so expansion to those sites.
I got my facts wrong actually. So they won't be going to Kempshot. They'll be going to South Ham. So we'll be sending the kids from Kennel Farm on a 3-mile journey through the estates of South Ham. It's just absolutely crazy. It's no joined up thinking. I mean, if we're going to put forward plan sites like this, we need a cohesive plan, and this just isn't it. Thank you.
Councillor Mr. Jones.
So what the planning application said is, and I was just amazed at this, is that the children from this site would go to Kempshot, and what they would do, they would ask the children and the families in Kempshot to now move into an expanded school in South Ham, and they would expect those people that children are attending the school in Kempshot to move, and they're asking those children to do that. Now, we can talk as much as we like tonight. The reality is this has gone to appeal on non-determination, and I think, you know, in relation to any policy, you know, it doesn't really matter what's going to happen, you know, and very little protection you will have. So I would hope that the children in the school in Kempshott start to plan their journey to the new school in Southam.
So we do have a response from the County Council on this particular site and the school situation. Would that normally be included in a policy or not?
It would only be included in the policy if the county was seeking something on the site.
Understood. Thank you. Councillor Cubitt?
In the evidence, I'm just looking at this site, so in the sustainability appraisal, it couldn't be more explicit about the problems that would result from the insufficient capacity of the schools. So, you know, again, it's about, if we're discussing wordsmithing, and you know, I mean, we identified on page 668 that there's going to be insufficient capacity in local primary schools, and at present a new primary school will be required, and contributions will be required, and we know that the contributions won't be sufficient from the developer. So is there anything that you would like to, Chair, to propose to put in for the wordsmithing of this, just to tighten that up?
No, I'm seeking advice from officers about where we are on this particular site to identify if there's a requirement for a school, and we've heard the answer that Hampshire County Council has given us. And I understand there's not a requirement for a school on this site. Councillor Mitchell?
I was just going to ask officers if the county's general comments on all of this are in the IDS. Have officers had any comments on the educational provisions set out in the IDS from members on this?
Right. Well, the IDP was discussed in general terms on the 4th of July.
I know the IDP was discussed, beg your pardon, these initials. His old age, mate. I know the IDP was discussed, but I'm asking have, you know, this was raised at development control because the question was asked, what about the children? And as Laura's quite rightly said, the answer seemed weird to the point of extraordinary. And I'm just wondering whether, is this because those who would be concerned about it haven't actually studied the IDP and what the county says it's going to do? Because it does seem that there are quite a few areas where we might want to question what the county says it's going to do. And have you had comments about it?
No specific comments on this site.
Asking how much it costs. So I have members. So members haven't. No, right.
Thank you. Councillor Cubitt?
Again, if you look at the site assessment, January 2013, and specifically in relation to Kennel Farm, it says, local schools, Kempshott Infant and Junior, are likely to be able to be expanded to cope with additional demand. Any expansion will blah, 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 and it says the cost is 1.5 million, which will be funded through developers' contributions. My point is, why don't we say we will require the developer to provide us with 1.5 million to pay for the cost that we've already identified in our evidence base is going to be required. That's my point. It's the old carrot and stick issue, isn't it?
We'd be collecting still contributions towards education from the provision of new homes, so indirectly the site would be funding school provision.
Councillor Mitchell?
The other thing that was raised by one of our speakers at least, and was raised in committee on this, is the question of potential impact of this development on the potential route and provision for a western bypass, which isn't mentioned anywhere, but it's always been said that the critical factor might be that we might have to allow for a western bypass. Now, I'm sure I'm going to get told this is all in the transport assessment, but we haven't yet seen the final. I haven't seen the final version of that. Maybe I just haven't had enough time to do enough reading. But is the transport assessment putting in a route for a western bypass, or is that somebody else's job, and if so, whom?
The transport assessment tests a scenario that gives an indicative route, not a specific route, and just in terms of looking at the impacts it might have in terms of taking traffic off the road in the plan period. But the ultimate point in terms of the master planning for the site lies with the landowner at this particular point in time, in terms of looking beyond the plan period. So it would be through that process that they would look at that particular issue.
I'm sorry, the landowner would look at the requirements for a western bypass. Am I hearing what you're saying? The landowner of this site would look at the requirements for a western bypass. The council wouldn't bother.
The council is the landowner, is it? They would be looking at the long-term planning of that site and the long-term master planning of the site. Oh, sorry.
Well, I know these things are very. I mean, I'm very easily confused. There is a general concern that says whatever comes out of Manydown, if they're going to build 10,000 houses there either is or is not going to be a requirement for a western bypass arising from that and all the other development. And my question is not who might take account of it sometime in the future, is who is looking at the availability of land, because it was raised explicitly and nobody said no, it doesn't affect it. It was raised explicitly in connection with this site that the development as proposed by the applicant, which could be easily done within the policies I've seen here probably, might impact upon our ability to put in a western bypass. And nobody said, oh no, it wouldn't. And so what I'm asking at the general level of the planning process is who is looking at where a western bypass, I mean, a western bypass would have to come out somewhere and it would have to go somewhere, and you've got land acquisition and so forth. We wouldn't own all the land, but we'd have to make provision for it to meet another road. And that was the issue that was raised in this connection. So who is agonising at the moment about if we want one, where will it meet another road? Who is agonising about that question?
It would be the landowner who's planning for Manydown in the longer term beyond the plan period. It would be the landowner who would look to that particular point.
I've got to bring the committee back to the object of what we're doing here this evening. Is there any comment? I'm waiting for Councillor Harvey to come back with some words. Councillor Mrs. James, on the policy of the site.
I'd like, as Councillor Cubitt said, I'd like what it says in whatever she read into the policy, because, as I said, in relation to the school, if you actually saw the planning application as to what was proposed, it was proposed that they expand the Southam school, and then the children that are in Kempshott school would go along to Southam, which we know wouldn't happen. So what in reality is going to happen is that everyone that in Kennel Farm is going to be expected to go to the new school, in the expanded school in Southam, which is a long journey, and everyone will have to do it by car, and they're not going to be able to walk there. So I think what is said within that document that Councillor Cubitt read out, there should be some reference to that in relation to schooling inside the policy, and we should expect that there is some schooling provision made that relates to this site.
Is that the view of the committee? Because at the policy level, and this is where I'm trying to still getting my head around some of these policies. I got to ask officers, the response that you got from County Council is because a planning application went in, and not because of the policies here. Because there should be something about, if it's identified, to put a one-liner in about school provision. Nobody's talking about how that school provision is made, but it should be identified, should it not, a bit rhetorical here, in the site policy, regardless of what the planning application generated out of a reply from Hampshire.
I think we've been engaging with the County Council in two respects. One is on the planning application, when we've had very detailed comments which have featured as part of the DC committee consideration. We've also had comments as part of the plan making process, and those are represented in the policies before you this evening. Where county wish to have a site provided on a school, we've made provision for that in the policy. If they wish to expand an alternative school nearby, then that's picked up through the IDP.
Thank you for that explanation. Councillor Harvey.
I've got two contributions to make to the word, but just on that education point. It seems that county certainly have not got their ideas straight on this. It seems that there's a very logical argument which you've made, which others have made, which would be relevant to the policy. So my line on this is for the benefit of what residents are quite clearly concerned about, for the benefit of what members around this table have said, it should be there. And in effect, if the county don't get with the programme, then they need to in the context of the local planning authority, showing the county a need arising from development. There's a perfectly logical conversation and negotiation to have here. And I think if we are genuinely saying that because of what county have done and because of what county have said, you're going to bus children halfway across Basingstoke, or walk children, or car children, it'd be great on the traffic, ain't it? It's even more on those roundabouts. Across Basingstoke, it's just daft. We genuinely need something in here to that relevance. Now, whether you're specific and say something along the lines of an application on this site will enable the expansion of Kempshott schools to meet the education requirements generated by any proposed development, which I would go down the lines of, or you keep it general in just the school provision context that you said, Chair, that's fine. The other 2 points, a little K and a little L if you like, new little bullet points, I would add a 50-metre buffer to protect the ancient woodland will be expected. That was out of H&E. And comes out of all of the conversations that other committees have had on the similar kind of subject area. And a little L, that the master plan and any subsequent application must comprehensively account for the protection of Old Down as a sink. Yeah.
Could you repeat it for the director?
Both of them. A 50...
And the school.
Yeah. You got the first, you got the school one. Okay. So, let me do them in order then. I've got little K. A 50-metre buffer to protect the ancient woodland will be expected. A little L. The master plan and any subsequent application must comprehensively account for the protection of Old Down as a sink. Sorry, forgive me. Comprehensively account for the protection of Old Down as a sink. And then as a suggestion for the education one, a little M, that an application on this site will enable the expansion of Kempshott schools to meet the education requirements generated by any proposed development. Or go with the general provision that you said, Chair, when you were talking just the other one that we've used in other policies. But again, that leaves it open that you do run the risk that this developer chooses or the development doesn't actually deliver it in the schools that we want it to be delivered in. Because we're not talking about on-site provision here, we're talking about mitigating off-site, which is a difference.
I have a question of you, Councillor Harvey. Well, you said ancient woodland. Does that have an identification? Is it called something, or is it just the ancient woodland on this site?
As I understand it, officers will help me with this, but when it came to H&E, we were told that ancient woodland as a particular designation, as a particular...
Okay, thank you. Is those three contributions from Councillor Harvey, are they the views of the committee to be included into the policies for this site? Yes, I got a no and a yes. Those indicating that they would like it included into the Kennel Farm site. Yes, you can do them one by one. Number one. Right, the 50-metre buffer around the ancient woodland. Protection of Old Down as a sink. Agreed. Then the education one. Well then, yeah. All those who would like it included within policy. Well, if you want a brief discussion, it's your time. Councillor Mitchell.
Well, there's a catch-22 here. I've just now looked at the education sections of the IDP, and it says full detailed feasibility studies will be required to confirm blah 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 when we know what the site allocations are, and that's sort of not quite in writing when we know, but that's obviously what it means. And I guess what's happened with the planning application is they've looked at that on the fly as opposed to done a full comprehensive feasibility study, but what they came up with was totally inappropriate if it was correctly reported to us, which it was in the office report. But I don't think that should be addressed by putting education provisions explicitly in individual site policies. It doesn't seem appropriate to me. The question is, so I don't agree with putting it in this one rather than any other one. The question is, how do we members take forward, having gone through all of this and got the site allocations laid down, how and when do we interact with county on the outcome of their detailed feasibility study, where we then have the opportunity to comment that says, well, you've got that bit wrong for all the reasons Laura just talked about.
Please.
I think where they're doing those particular things at the moment, they consult with us as a borough. So there are a number of expansions of particular sites. There was one in Overton not so long ago, and then there's one at Park Village. So they come to us, they ask for our consultation, it goes on the members' bulletin, ward members are made aware, and they consult through that process.
Councillor Harvey.
I appreciate what Councillor Mitchell's saying, and I disagree to the extent that I think a site-specific reference in this context is relevant because of the situation we find ourselves in. And don't forget, this isn't just a normal local plan, and this isn't just a normal process. We're dealing with the consequences of applications and also the consequences of where we've got to so far here. So if we're going to take this site forward, bearing in mind what everybody else has said, and we don't account for the educational aspect of it in some way, shape or form, we run the risk later down the road of the developer or the county running away from what would be the real need that we've identified in that planning app, and I think we've identified around the table tonight. It's a straight choice, I do appreciate that, but I think in this case, a site-specific reference is relevant to give protection and to give security going forward for what we think we need. And I would stand by it's the Kempshott schools in that context.
Mr. Hunter.
Just a point, I think Mr. Lambert made the point that the Kempshott school in the eyes of the county can't be expanded. I think that was the one point. And I think that the fact that the infrastructure policy, as I remember it, seeks contributions towards education from all developments. So I think your points are covered. The only in site policies where land allocation is required is there a mention of a site reserved for education.
Councillor Cubitt.
I'm slightly confused because, Councillor Mitchell says he's looked at the IDP. If you look at the table, that great big table that we all looked at with the prices and the £230 million we need, right, page 265 of the papers that we're looking at tonight, down the page, just below secondary education, under primary education, it says developer contributions for expansion of existing school, reference BAS 114, necessary. Delivery 2014-2019, £1.6 million. So I don't understand. I mean, maybe I'm inhabiting a different world, but I don't understand why, if we've identified that in our IDP, Councillor Leake would have a problem with us specifying it in the policy because we've identified it as necessary. It's the stick element, it's the we need a road, it's the we need a flipping railway station that never comes, and the reason why they don't come is because we don't put them in the box, and if we put them in the box then the developer has to give it to us. And if we say it's part of the CIL, well that's not great either, because if you look at BAS 114 just as an example, we've already said that the developer's got to give us a community hall, Councillor Mitchell's favourite subject. That costs 260,000. And then there's reference, do you know what I mean? I mean, just saying CIL, we all know the CIL is not going to add up to X, Y, Z plus affordable homes equals. It's just not going to happen. And that's why we end up with an infrastructural deficit every single time.
Right, we're going to have, I'd like to know the feeling of the committee on the subject of including a specific education line entry into this policy. All those in favour of what has been proposed by Councillor Harvey? Those against it? That's carried to be included within the policy. The words to be recommended. Thank you very much. I'm moving on to south of Blosswood Lane. Do we have any speakers? I'm sure we have. There's nobody in the public gallery who wants to speak on this? Councillor Keith Watts.
Thank you, Chairman. And now for something completely different. I support this allocation, but I've some things to say about it. This allocation is 2 SLA sites. In fact, there are 3 landowners involved. Older residents will remember that I fought tooth and claw against WIT 007 being Category 1 in the SLA until noise studies have been done. Because the SLA guidance clearly said constraints have to be looked at. Well, actually, for WIT 007, I think 3 noise studies have been done because the developers didn't like the first one they got and got a second one. Our officer's response was extraordinary. I mean, I really must quote this. The recommendation for mitigation of noise hazards alongside a trunk road is to 3-storey blocks of flats with windows on only one side. You can see this exactly as you go into Portsmouth on the. But I'm happy to say that our planning officers didn't suggest that that was the answer for rural Whitchurch. So WIT 007, there is now an agreement, I think, between the landowner and the Basingstoke local planning department on the yield of 50, with taking that noise thing into account. Certainly there must be some master plan somewhere because the WIT 006 people have included some of it on their planning application. There's now a current planning application for 2/3 of the site. It's 89 rather than 100 houses. They've been negotiated down, I believe, by our planning development colleagues. And it does commit to 40% affordable homes, which includes 4 bungalows to rent, which I should claim as an achievement. Really good. So that's subparagraph A. B, design and layout of high quality and character. Well, that's a matter of opinion, but the 2 developers involved built the 2 adjacent estates, and they do seem to be of high quality and character, and they're planning to respect that style. Responds positively to the North Middlesex Downs area of outstanding natural beauty. Well, I'll leave Councillor Mitchell to talk about that, because providing an appropriate edge to the town, since the AOB was specified, somebody's built the trunk road A34, and that provides the edge to the town. What this development is doing is filling some of the gap in between it. Historic features fine. Now, E. I already mentioned elsewhere in the report the reference to congestion in Whitchurch, and the council was going to do its best to alleviate it. Blosswood Lane and Bell Street are in fact on the C22, which at its western end goes through Picket Peace in Andover, where the Test Valley intend to allow 1,000 new dwellings. You know I've been very concerned about the highway proposals. The officers kindly broke me a sort of idiot's guide to the western end of the highway assessment. I can see how the numbers calculated from Test Valley and our own proposed development come out at too small to worry anybody, apart from the fact, of course, the five-way junction in the middle of Whitchurch is congested already, as it says elsewhere in this report. And the other aspect of concern, which I did mention when the consultants were here, and I think what I got was a nod and no real response, it's not just the junction, it's that London Street in Whitchurch and Overton High Street are narrow streets on the B3400. So it's not just a junction, but a narrowing and parking and so on causes congestion there. So possibly my only negative comment in this is that although I'm now accepting the transport assessment, I don't believe that we're mitigating the traffic from the large developments in Test Valley nor what's proposed in Whitchurch and Overton adequately, and I'd like to think that some more can be done on that. Sorry, H. This is good, this one. Include measures to protect and enhance locally and nationally recognised species and habitats. Well, they've got a detailed plan. Can I tell you, slow worms are common in Whitchurch, even if they're scarce elsewhere. The slow worms are all going to be rounded up, and they're going to be transported to Councillor Mitchell's ward. He didn't know this was coming.
Yes.
To land that they own in the middle of the intersection of the A34 and the A343.
Oh, yeah.
And I predict two results of this. To start with, there's going to be lots of squashed slow worms at Washwater as they're trying to escape, and meanwhile all the slow worms in Whitchurch will be moving in to fill the gaps in the habitat. Anyway, but we can't say there's no attention to detail with this application. I've mentioned the A34. Well, I've had discussions at some length about the mitigation of noise standards, and in particular around the affordable housing, because I was concerned to start with that the affordable housing seems to be clustered closest to the road. This applicant has now changed that, but all of the houses are being built to the same standard with the glazing and so on and so forth, and none of them go over the line that would make them too close to the A34. So what's to oppose? Well, what is to oppose is that this is on a greenfield. Nobody likes development on greenfield sites. There are some unfortunate people who moved into new houses while this was in the SLAR, were told there are no plans for developing it. And since the same builder was involved, I think that they've a grievance. They will be opposing this. And people have got a house overlooking a field where they watch buzzards and red kites foraging, and not going to like this. But we do need houses in Whitchurch. I know the people who are queuing up for those affordable homes, and we have to make a choice. There is nowhere but greenfields. The one suggestion that a landowner just made to build on the allotments instead of greenfields, of course they're going to put the allotments on a greenfield. So
can I interrupt you just for a
yes.
second, please?
Standing
orders, members.
Right.
We will try and complete this as soon as possible. I'm going to suggest 10:30, up to 10:30. If we can complete it before then, wonderful. But I'd like to take that as a drop dead time.
Say 10. And look at it again.
Right. Fine. Okay.
Okay.
It's in your hands.
Point L, if I may, archaeological remains. It seems that the latest view is we do have important archaeological remains, and they weren't sure if it was an old railway working or a Bronze Age site. So there's scope here for Whitchurch people to sell sausage and a bun to the rest of you when you come to visit our site. Now, schools, for Councillor Mitchell, we've been on this a very long time, and I did ask about the schools the last time we had an IDP, which was, I think, in January 2012, and our officers arranged for me to talk to the county's planner because I thought the wording in there was particularly vague. but he helped me to understand Whitchurch and Overton taken together, but since he's responsible for planning new school developments for the whole of Basingstoke and Dean, until we give him some more clues, there's no way he can respond in more detail. So I support this allocation, and I'm optimistic.
Councillor Mitchell.
I was just interested in little d, that we're going to preserve and enhance the architectural and historical significance of the manor, etc., and ensure sufficient mitigation measures. What does that mean exactly? It appears to be contradictory. We either are going to preserve and enhance it, or we're going to mitigate it. Well, I just to say preserve, rather than, because I don't see how your new development is going to enhance the historic significance of something. I've never understood that, like enhancing the landscape, you know, put a lot of windmills up. But I don't like the idea of telling them we're going to preserve and enhance it, and they can come along with mitigation measures. The two things don't march.
Can I suggest it may be that the public will be able to see the granary now. As for mitigation, I think probably the owner of the manor farmhouse doesn't find it too nice having a housing estate all around his garden.
Could the officers explain this a little bit, or clarify it more than anything else? Is that a view of the committee that we would take away the and ensure efficient mitigation measures because we think they're actually superfluous? Are you happy with that, Councillor? Yeah, fine. Is that the view of the committee? Thank you. Anything else on south of Flosswood Lane? Redlands. Do we have... thank you, Councillor Cubitt. Ask, is there anybody from the Bramley side? Bramley, Sheffield? No. Councillor Cubitt.
I'm just going to add three little letters because I always do what Councillor Mitchell tells me to do. So so F says ensure acceptable noise and odour standards can be met within homes, blah blah blah. And the end of the full stop, say avoids noise sensitive locations. Okay? I'm getting the words, by the way, from the sustainability appraisal. So that's are the committee minded to support that?
That's my job. Thank you. In case anybody wants to speak to that comment that you just made. Thank you, Councillor Cubitt.
Okay.
And that was E, did you say? F.
So the full stop then reads, so treatment works, comma, instead of full stops, and avoids noise-sensitive locations.
Anybody else want to comment on that one? Councillor Ms. Baker.
Through you, Chair, just a query as to how much of the site might be affected by being a noise-sensitive location. Can we get any guidance on that?
I think it's a fairly general thing. We've been saying this in some of the policies. You've got to put a sort of generalisation on. Then it would, and I'm fishing here with the officers, but that would be determined by the Environmental Health organisation to determine, what is an acceptable noise. Councillor Cubitt?
Yeah, well, where I'm getting it from is firstly we have a pollution policy already, right? But also on page 457 of the sustainability appraisal, it says, and our officers wrote this, a detailed policy will also be required that the siting and design of the development responds to landscape constraints, avoids noise-sensitive locations, respects the nearby Grade 2 listed Sherfield Hall, protects mature parkland trees, And all I was doing was just going to insert those. It goes on, but the others are a bit more kind of generic. Whereas those couldn't be more specific, and they've been identified by our officers, and they are part of the evidence base, and therefore there's a legitimate reason for inserting them into the policy.
Councillor Mr. Baker.
I'm very grateful to Councillor Mrs. Cubitt for explaining where the words came from, and I'm happy with them. Thank you.
Could we take that on committee to insert those words into that policy F? Thank you very much. Anything else? I've got a question of the officers. I'm assuming from our affordable, I think I'm making the right thing here, we've got X percentage in all these policies for the affordable homes. Is that going to be?
In terms of that, in the cabinet papers, there's an officer recommendation in terms of going with the evidence that we've got before us. I think we had that discussion last night. It's obviously then for the cabinet to decide whether they go with a view of the officers or the view of the committee.
Overton Hill. Now, Councillor Tilbury. The floor is yours. Putting up for long.
Right. Right. Yeah, first is an affordable, we were just talking about the affordable housing viability. It's shown 40% affordable housing is viable in the rural areas. Can I ask the excess in the Overton one is removed and the 40% reinstated? Regardless, this policy is probably redundant as the landowner Delarue has already put in a planning application, as we've seen with most of the other sites, as has virtually every other early release site owner. As was agreed in the no quashed, or should it be squash course strategy, this site should not be considered as suitable for immediate release. They have barely finished the previous Overton Hill development of 99 houses and the similar sized Foxdown site. Yet here it's suggested that Overton requires a site for 120 houses almost immediately. This will be the largest site ever built in our village, so please give us a break, even if it's only for 5 years. Worse still, we know that given the choice of building in Basingstoke and Overton or any of the rural areas, any developer will choose us as the houses cost the same to build and deliver greater profits. So early release will do little to meet housing need where it's greatest in Basingstoke town. We have raised numerous issues relating to sewage and the hopelessly inadequate road systems before, yet there is nothing in this plan that can even be remotely described as dealing with these issues. Last year, the new intake at Overton Primary School went up from 40 to 60 in 1 year. How are we expected to cope with these sorts of issues? The county doesn't seem to have a clue what's going on, and I think we've heard that already. They got a bit of a nasty shock. As if this isn't bad enough, on top of the 120, we have the prospect of an additional 150 houses through the neighbourhood planning route, which you'll get to later. I'll probably be in bed by then. This council is effectively asking Overton residents to write a neighbourhood plan for which they have already decided the outcome, making a mockery of the supposed localism we were promised by the government. I mean, this is a complete nonsense, isn't it? Neighbourhood planning, but this is how many houses you have. I mean, the idea of this is supposed to come from the bottom up, not the other way round. So please, can we do something about that? And please give us a break. We've been quite reasonable in accepting that we probably need 120 houses. We certainly don't need the additional 150, but we don't need them at this moment. I mean, you just can't keep building houses in a small village forever and ever. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillor Tilbury? Thank you, Councillor Tilbury. Mr. Peter Barr, please. Is he here? Baker. Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Mrs. Cubitt. Councillor Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Chair. I've said before, Councillor Tilbury has repeated again tonight, that there is a huge concern in Overton about the recent high level of development and concern about the numbers being proposed and the timing of the houses being proposed on Overton Hill. There are infrastructure problems that we've told you about before, and we are constrained, and this also relates to the comments that Councillor Watts just made about the constraints that are put in place by the historic road layouts within the village. We need a robust local plan, and we feel this particularly in Overton because we've got so many Category 1 sites. But we all know that the problem we have lies with those who delay work on Manydown, and Overton is one of the places now suffering because of it. Two specific policies in Little A, as Councillor Tilbury said, the viability assessment for affordable housing did show that 40% affordable housing would be viable, and so I hope that Cabinet will agree to 40% being the figure that goes in Little A, because we certainly do have people who I know of who are waiting for affordable housing. I'd like to take you now to policy. No, actually, to the final sentence, the phasing of this site. We've talked about sewage in Overton before now, and some of us have had closer encounters with sewage in the village than we ever wanted to have. I would turn to the IDP, which states, I'll try and find the right page, page 256 of the agenda, para 3216, which says that local network infrastructure improvements required as a result of new development would need to be provided by the developer, and Southern Water will bid for investment funding for sites allocated in the local plan via the Ofwat periodic review process. I'd like to expand that slightly by what was in the site assessment on sewage, if I can find the page. Which says that that Southern Water will bid for investment funding for sites allocated in an adopted LDF via the Ofwat periodic review process. Fine, that's just what the summary in our papers said. The next review is in 2014 and covers investment in the period 2015 to 2020. No costs or timescales can be provided at this stage. Whilst this has been assessed negatively to acknowledge the issue, this is not considered to be a significant constraint to development, as it could be addressed by way of phasing. Now that picks up the point that Councillor Tilbury was just making. And I think that we need to follow the evidence that we have before us in the site assessment. And I would ask, common sense, I would ask Chairman whether the committee would request the portfolio holder and Cabinet to allow for that phasing, to allow the bid to be made through the periodic review, which doesn't begin until 2014, and would therefore suggest that in the final sentence of the policy we should shift the development on this site out of the first 5 years of the plan and into the second or even the final 5 years. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Officers to comment?
Thank you, Chair. It's probably just worth explaining a little bit about the site assessment process and how you add detail to a proposal as you get towards the planning application. Because the site assessment was undertaken at the stage when we were looking at all Category 1 sites, and obviously as you move towards an allocation and then the developer moves towards an application, you'll begin to investigate in more detail and understand the issues in a greater extent. We've contacted the developers for the Overton Hill site to see what stage they're at with regard to drainage and sewage, and they've informed us that sewage upgrades would be required, and they've detailed what those sewage infrastructure improvements would be, and they'd be undertaken under Section 98 of the Water Industry Act. So there's some certainty on behalf of the developer that these can be taken forward, and Southern Water seem to be in a general agreement at that point. So what I'm trying to say is, as we move through the process, these issues tend to be resolved until a solution is reached.
Councillor Mrs Baker.
I think I'd like to point out the fact that we've had a similar situation in the past over the site at Foxdown, where Southern Water said that the work could be done and took the money from the developer, who was willing to pay for the necessary infrastructure improvement, but then Southern Water couldn't actually get round to getting any further with it, in spite of having taken the developer's money. And that resulted in an application having to come back to DC committee to lift one of the restrictions, one of the conditions on the Foxdown permission, because the necessary sewage infrastructure, the best will of the developer, simply couldn't be brought into place before whichever the nth house was occupied, which was the condition in the planning application, and following that there were a number of sewage overflow issues which involved pollution of the River Test, which is particularly highlighted as a river in which we need to protect the water quality. So, you know, in a sense, once bitten, twice shy. I am terribly nervous of even with assurances of some kind from Southern Water and from the would-be developer, having seen in the past that it didn't work, and having the protection of one of our most important chalk streams nationally. I'm really anxious about this, so I again would repeat my suggestion that it is better to be safe rather than to be sorry, as we were over Foxdown, and would ask again that this committee may recommend to the portfolio holder and cabinet that it be moved into the second 5-year term of the plan period.
Anything more from officers? No. Committee, it's been suggested that we change the phasing, and the last sentence, it's not a policy, but it's the last sentence here. Now, numbers. I'm presuming we would just shift this to the right if you wanted to inject numbers, or 2014-15, we start at 2018-19 and slip it another few years to the right.
Sorry, just in terms of if we go back to page 59, you get the various 5-year phasing periods, so 2019-20 stroke through to 23-24.
Suggestion from Councillor Mrs Baker that we adjust those dates for this particular site. Councillor Mitchell.
Well, I'd support Councillor Baker's proposal, based on evidence in my own ward and round the borough. Very little faith of what suddenly summoning up the courage to suddenly early give Southern Water the permission to spend the necessary money. It is very peculiar that a private sector company has its budget set by a regulator telling it what it can't spend, but that's a matter for another court. But I do think it's very foolish of us to assume that this site, it's not a question whether it could come forward, because of course Southern Water will say yes when there's a planning application. That is the danger. When there is all the evidence, and officers should take note of the fact that this is actual evidence, because we keep being told about evidence. We have recent evidence in various places that Southern Water are not putting enough effort and money into sewerage improvements.
Is that the view of the committee? Agreed? No? How many say no to this? How many say yes? fine. We're going. Okay. Anything else on Overton Hill? Moving on to Swing Swang Lane. Councillor Hewitt, you do have another ward councillor in the room. Is there any speakers from the public? No. Fine. Councillor Hewitt.
Yeah, just very, very briefly, again, along the lines of the previous SOL 02, if we could a G, where it reads, include appropriate green infrastructure to meet local needs, providing links to the existing green network, instead of a semicolon, if we could have comma, as an on-site open space has been identified as required. That's the first request. And the second one is in J. Ensure acceptable noise standards can be met within homes and amenity areas through suitable noise mitigation measures by way of a noise barrier along the railway line, comma, in light of the adjacent railway line and nearby industrial uses, full stop. Again, that's been identified as a need by our officers in the evidence base. Very explicitly stated. And finally in K, it reads, ensure the potential for shallow groundwater is investigated and appropriate mitigation measures are implemented. Instead of full stop, comma, to ensure no future groundwater flooding, full stop. And then I'm very happy.
Comments from officers? So I understand that mitigation identification is a straight lift out of...
Yeah. I got it straight out of this one on site assessment January 2013 on Swing Swang Lane.
Thank you.
It says, in fact, in 3 places that a noise barrier needs to be erected along the railway line.
Members, do you agree with those amendments to this? Yes, certainly.
What is shallow groundwater? Does that mean a high water table? What is shallow groundwater? Is that a recognised expression I've never heard of?
As you defined it, I understand, Councillor Mitchell. High water table. Why they didn't say high water table, which is the common way of understanding it?
I just caution that to ensure there is no future groundwater flooding is one of those things which is sort of crystal ballish. And I just not entirely clear that if I was planning officer, I'd know how to test whether something not happening in the future had been clearly guarded against. It seems a difficult thing for a planning officer to test.
The whole
That's
site...
a question to officers. Hang on, Mr. Skipper, I'll come back to you. Any comment, officers, on that one?
Just in terms of testing, that would be the type of thing that we would expect some sort of study done, and that would be what would be presented through the report to committee.
Mrs. Hewitt has suggested these. Oh, Councillor Leake first.
I've had the misfortune to spend several nights in the adjacent building, and I have to say I haven't been kept awake by trains or being concerned about the trains, but if a barrier is required, so be it, but I wouldn't have thought it was necessary.
Councillor Mrs. Hewitt has suggested some rewordings on 3 of the policies in Swing Swang Lane. Is it the mood of the committee to say that we can accept those? Yes, thank you very much. Okay. Now, that's deliverable sites. We're going to move on to SS4, ensuring a supply of deliverable sites. Councillor Mrs. Hewitt. Just to those members of the public, you're here now on your own time. You're very welcome to stay. Did you want to speak on? Fine. It is. It's one of the possible sites. It's mentioned in appendix scenario 2, I think. The reason I'm probably going to say no to this is that it's it's not one of the sites moved to go.
It's only if members were looking to replace sites with another site where I think the discussion would be required.
It's not going to be used as a replacement site at this stage of the game. Thank you. If you would do that, I'd be very grateful. And thank you for bringing that up. We've completed with sites. We're going to some more general policies now. So, SS4, ensuring a supply deliverables sites. We're looking for comments on this at the moment. And Councillor Mrs. Cubitt.
Yeah, I just wondered whether you could just talk me through what the prior to release of any further allocated sites or granting of planning permissions actually means in real terms. So if we had a hypothetical situation of a site, say Cufford and Razor, being developed, and suddenly the amount of diodes increase, and there's a major erosion in the quality of the river, and not all the houses have been built on Razors and Cufford. What will you do? What will we do as a council to ensure that there's not further deterioration in an existing development that's being phased?
I think this policy would protect against giving new planning permissions, but it wouldn't stop if a planning application had been granted. There wouldn't be a mechanism to stop that from continuing and finishing, but it would enable you to stop to release the next site and no more planning applications or no more planning approvals until such a time as that matter had been resolved.
You see, thank you very much for that answer, and I thought that's exactly what you were going to say, because that's exactly what it reads. And the problem is this, is that we've been told that we have a problem with our river, and we've been told that we're going to monitor the river, and at a certain point when it looks like it's going worse, we can stop the process and protect the river. But actually, what our local plan policy says is not that. Our local plan policy says, actually, you're going to build the 12,000 or whatever, however many thousands of houses, and we ain't got anything whatsoever to stop those thousands of houses that are going to be in the strategically allocated sites in this plan. And I can't think of anywhere else in the policies that we can stop the process if we can see that we're suddenly getting major deterioration in, our Salmonoid River.
I think, well, I can't say any more than I've already said. If we got to that point and we haven't released sites and we would restrict planning permissions at that point, and that would be the mechanism that we would have to stop at that point, and this policy gives you that hook to do so.
Once the allocated strategic sites are allocated, they're released sites, aren't they? They're not non-released. So you were talking about subsequent and further.
They may be allocated, but if they hadn't been subject to a planning application, then you would restrict the planning application. You would say we can't give any more planning permissions until such a time as that matter on the water had been resolved. So they may be allocated in the plan over the 15-year period, but if, let's say, at year 7, the deterioration was recognised, we would have to say, well, we can no longer give permissions until that matter is resolved. It would be that process. Anything that had been given permission in prior to that would be able to go ahead.
Just finally, normally in a 15-year period, with the numbers of strategic sites that we're theoretically going to be approving, what's the time frame of the planning permissions being granted before one building's even built? I.e., could we have a rash of approvals, all of the strategic sites approved, then the phasings start kicking in, then whoops, we've got a major problem because the estrogen levels or the antidepressant levels or the, whatever mercury levels are screwing up our entire environmental system, and we've given all the planning permissions. What's the time frame?
I think if you think of the current local plan, there are some sites that still haven't got planning permission, which were allocated in the last local plan. And some probably that came very early in the process, let's say a Razor's Farm or a Marnell Partners in the process already. But then for the very large sites where you've got master planning to do, there's a fair bit of work, preparatory work. You're not likely to see the permissions coming forward until the sort of middle of the plan period. So you get a kind of an ebb and flow of perhaps some of the smaller, more easy ones at the start, and the bigger, more difficult ones in the middle. And sometimes you may find that you have sites that don't get a permission within the plan period, or they get an outline, but then the reserve matters needs to be dealt with.
Councillor Mrs. James, did you want to speak on this one?
Mine was just in relation to all of those sites that are going for or have going to appeal or going for planning permission that were in the phasing and are going to come forward earlier. How will that affect this plan? And that is required to be managed to ensure a 5-year supply. Have we looked at those sites that are going for planning permission or are an appeal, and will we need to rephase this plan, and where does that leave our 5-year land supply?
I mean, you're all used to seeing the annual monitoring report. We manage and phase the development as that, and bring that to you through the annual monitoring report. At the moment, we've got no 5-year land supply, so any permissions that come early on would start to fill that gap in the 5-year land supply. We have a housing trajectory over the 15 years, and as you'll all recognise, some years we deliver more, some years we deliver less, but we're hopefully on target for meeting the overall figure by the time you get to the end of the plan. So it's monitored through that process.
But will there be, towards the end of the plan, a shortfall in relation to the 5-year if we're going to need a continual 5-year land supply? And if so, do we need to identify further sites to meet that gap?
The plan meets the target over the 15-year period. So if, for example, you have more sites delivering at the beginning of the period, your land supply would be lower towards the end as a result of that.
So when you say it's going to be lower, does it mean that we won't have a 5-year land supply towards the end?
Actually, what we are required to build will be less if we've built more at the beginning. So therefore the supply over that 15-year period will meet the overall total. Averages out, yeah. Averages out. So more at the beginning, you need less at the end.
I know you need less, but don't you still need the 5-year land supply? Yeah, but just less of it.
The target would be less.
Right, is that all on that particular one? Yes, Councillor Mitchell?
I'm sure I've asked this before, but on the old plan, we had a release programme where we released allocated sites according to whether there was enough development going on. Does that still go on? Do we still have a release thing, or are all allocated sites up for grabs anytime anyone wants to put in a planning application?
We don't have a release mechanism in the same way as we did before because we had an oversupply, a significant oversupply in the last plan. So that was why it allowed us to manage sites, so some would come forward and some wouldn't.
Right. Going to move on to SS5, which I think is the last one of these things that we're going to be looking at this evening. And no comments, so general agreement on this one? Now, we've got to go through this. The committee notes and makes comments to cabinet on.
Which they've done, and we've noted.
We've done the first one. We've done the second. This third we've now accomplished. To approach.
Presentation, we agreed that on the
First night. Recommend cabinet the housing strategy and housing sites outlined in the draft pre-submission local plan. Now, yes, I'm just let you know that we've been through the sites at the back of the supplementary paper that came out. It's the annex, is it an appendix? Annex? Scenario 2 are the ones that we've completed. And we've agreed these, and that's the set of sites that will be going up to the cabinet. Can I have a consensus from the committee, please? Right. I have some people that are not going to go along with that. Can I have an indication from those members that do not wish to see scenario 2 to go up to the cabinet? Okay, who's for? Submit it to the cabinet. And those against? That's okay, approved. This is consensus of the committee that scenario 2 will be recommended to the cabinets.
We did that on the first
night. Delegation power, we did that as well. That's for cabinet. Councillor Raphael, is there anything else you want to address the committee on?
And the delegation, which we've discussed it before about whether matters need to come back before committee after consultation. What I propose with the officers is to publish whatever the changes would be and give a short period of time for a response from members. So you all know what it's going to be. So if it's typographical, you know it's typographical, and if it's a site moving around, you'll know that that's something far more significant. We need to probably have a discussion on it. But if you all know what it is, then you won't have to worry about quantifying whether it's minor or major, because you'll see what it is and it'll be obvious to you what it is. So we'll publicise that somehow or other in October, all being well. Yes, October, isn't that right, Mr. Hunter? October. Yes, I can just about see it. I've got glasses on.
Because I've received the cabinet papers, so will there be some amendments to?
With respect, what I'm saying is, if you look under here, the delegation under paragraph 3.11 to 3.13 deals with what happens after the consultation, and that the cabinet member is delegated to through the officers to clear up any problems. And there has been some discussion. I just thought I'd raise it with you, that what I want you to do is actually see what it is we're going to do, regardless of what it is and how minor or major, just so that you can be reassured nothing's going to happen with a slight of plan. Between now and cabinet,
We've got a supplementary report to issue following the last 2 nights of discussion. So we've got to pick up all the comments, and then we'll take those forward and put that in a report.
And before we go, committee, I'd like to thank you all for your perseverance over the last few weeks. I think we got through a lot of work. We got to where we wanted to get to. I'd like to thank the officers as well for their support during the committee period.
And Chairman, could you release us from further duty on this committee? That's normally what the judge does at the end, isn't it?
Yeah, okay. I'll bid you good night and enjoy the rest of the week and a nice weekend coming up. Thank you.